Don't let it, Valeria says. Be late to your own prediction. Which is ridiculous and correct. I loosen the sequence I use when I'm tired. Eyes pick, shoulder agrees, hips deliver, and replace it with the one I brought into the last chapter. Cut first, discover the rest already happened. The prediction misses by the length of a thought. The plate fogs with confusion. The threads behind me sing a note that is not a triumph. Then the room stops, pretending at soft power. The plate goes blank. The air goes still. Every thread in the chamber lights blood red at once, and the word that comes has edges. Obey. The command doesn't aim at knees or hips or wrists. It goes for the spine and the part of the spine that leaks into the parts of the mind that like being told what to do because responsibility is heavy. For a heartbeat, my body leans toward convenient. I don't fight it with anger. Anger is loud and the thread hum loves loud. I put my breath in the space the word wants and leave it there until the temptation to let go passes. Then I move, zero tell, no preload, the way a cat decides it is somewhere else. The word hits nothing of mine and keeps going. It finds the pillar. The pillar doesn't have knees either. Good. Valeria says, voice bright and sharp. Again. Please again. I enjoy saying no to stupid nouns. The glass relents enough to try class over force. New words appear in pairs like bureaucrats in suits. Pause/wait. Hold/listen. Still/silent. I discover a mean trick. I can accept one without giving the other. I can be still without being silent. I can pause without waiting. I can hold without listening. Motion is a choice. Not motion is also a choice. The room hates that both can be true at once if I keep my shoulders from volunteering. Language games, I say. Language hates being ignored. Valeria says happily. Keep doing it. The bridge of threads collapses and rebuilds behind the plinth with the glass. The glass rotates, showing me the far door, a clean rectangle in the opposite wall, then prints one more line as if this were a well-run test with a polite conclusion. Please proceed to the next chamber. I'm sure it means well, Valeria lies. Erebus. Decision. I don't move. I look at the way the threads frame that door. They don't quite touch it. They touch everything you might do as you approach it. Set your foot. Lift your hand. Lower your head a fraction. Read the sign. Align yourself to symmetry because that's what body's like. I step in on uglier geometry and low expectations. My eyes stay soft. My heel stays out of politics. My breath stays mine. Noum. Nopul. The door doesn't turn into a lecture. It's just there. I don't thank it. Doors shouldn't be thanked for doing their jobs. As I pass the threshold, I feel it for the first time. A film on the air very different from the threads. Like silk over stone. Like a smile you don't trust. It has Lysandra's perfume in it. Sweet. Bright. That prickle you get when every color in the room feels like it's looking at you. But underneath the sweetness, the stone has straight lines. Not lust's coaxing. Not the sideways invite. This is the top-down kind of certainty that tells traffic where to go and breath when to fall in line. The next hall confirms the suspicion. It is narrower than it needs to be. The floor shows faint lanes that match the width of a shoulder. The ceiling has ridges spaced to the cadence of a good march. Even the light has a tempo if you let it. I don't. Memory crawls up out of a quieter day. Julius on a balcony in a city where the streets wouldn't stop arguing. He lifted his hand and the arguing paused. Not because people were impressed, not because they were afraid, but because everything from birds to buses stepped into the same beat for 2 holy seconds. Not peace. Order. The kind that left room for both kindness and law, until someone made a god angry and the god made sure Julius had no more balconies to stand on. I swallow around a throat that would prefer not to. The lanes on the floor feel familiar now that I have the name. I can choose not to step in them. I do. The hall pretends not to pout. You're making a face, Valeria says softly. I know whose bones are in the walls. I say, and hate how true it sounds. Not Julius himself. The shape of him. The gift that made a city breathe together, stolen, wrapped in perfume, used to make a tower pretend it is a throne. I test a simple thing. I press my palm against the wall and push, not with muscle, just intent. The stone answers with a tick I can feel in the bones of my hand, the same tick I felt when Julius turned a traffic junction into an orchestra. Absolute control. Not mind control. Everything control. Gravity with opinions. Angles with a captain. Doors that vote. The film of Lysandra rides over it like a delicate glove. Lust sells. Order installs. The hall tries one last time to set the cadence for me. The ridges in the ceiling pulse with a beat I could borrow. I don't borrow. I breathe 4 in, 6 out, and let that be the only metronome anyone gets to own in this body. At the far end of the corridor, glass thickens into a door that looks like it knows me. The handle shapes itself into something my hand would like to trust. The film on the air turns brighter, party voice, velvet tablecloth, all your favorite people already seated. Do not, Valeria says, deadly cheerful. I wasn't going to, I say, and this time I don't even want to lie. I stop just short and listen, not with ears, with the part of me that hates being told what to think. The film whispers invitations. The stone beneath gives me the tiniest tick of a salute, like a loyal bureaucrat trapped at a bad wedding. It clicks together all at once, like a puzzle that never was a puzzle once you had the last piece. This isn't lust, I say, voice low. It's wearing lust like perfume. Underneath, Erebus finishes, for once not clinical at all. Order. Empyrean order, I say, and the door hears me. Every thread in the walls lights up at once. The ridges in the ceiling hammer the same beat. The glass in front of me fogs with words that aren't ink or light but weight. Kneel. I kept my hand an inch from the glass door and breathed. 4 in, 6 out. The air tasted like perfume over stone. Lust on the surface. Something straighter, stronger, and far older underneath. Empyrean order. The moment you say the name, the room stops pretending not to listen. Arthur? Valeria murmured along my forearm, her voice bright but sharp. You're making the face you make right before you decide to pick a fight with a building. I'm remembering, I said. The threads of compulsion in the walls brightened, singing in a unified chorus. The ridges in the ceiling picked up a soft, insistent beat. The glass door before me fogged, and the word flashed again, polite as a guillotine. Kneel. I didn't humor it. I let my own breath be the only rhythm that counted in my bones, and my step the only vote my body cast. The command searched for a hinge of fear or habit to grab onto. It found none. The fog thinned. The glass cleared. Under my hand, the jam ticked again. A faint salute, patient and tired. Julius, I said, because names matter, and this one was the key. The tower answered. The entire room changed its mind about what it was. The walls pulled away without moving. The ceiling didn't lift, yet the air sat higher, cleaner. The cloying perfume of lust's power peeled away from the architecture like old, sun-rotted wallpaper. What remained was brass and cool stone and the clean, steady hum of things that like being on time. The threads of compulsion faded, replaced by lines you only see if you've stood on rooftops at dawn. Street grids and sight lines and the tidy, engineered spine of a city that has learned perfect posture. Valeria whistled, a low, appreciative sound. He made the inside of a place sit up straight. A balcony slid into existence from the far wall, the way a half-forgotten memory walks into the middle of a conversation and everyone intuitively makes room. It was made of polished stone, with a rail worn smooth by hands that had carried plans, not weapons. It wasn't grand. It was designed. Its view wasn't of a skyline, but of the idea of one. Lanes, flows, and the complex intersections where arguments would happen, unless someone who loved the city enough got there early to keep them from starting. Bootsteps, measured and quiet, not loud. Respect doesn't need to shout. He wasn't shining. He wasn't glowing. He simply arrived like a conclusion you can't argue with. Julius Slatemark looked younger than the portraits make him. Not boy young. Decision young. His hair was the color of late wheat. His coat built to carry a city's weather, with no jewels or chains of office. The famous Slatemark mark on his brow was faint as a scar you forget you have until it aches in the rain. His eyes were not kind. They were not cruel. They were the calm of a man who has counted to the end of a problem and then started over, just to make sure he didn't lie to himself the first time. He stopped a pace from the rail and set one hand on the stone. The rail accepted the hand like it had done so 1,000 times. The air around him did what air does around people who have been obeyed by storms and by streets. It waited. "Well," Valeria said into my mind, her voice bright but very, very small. "That's not terrifying at all." Erebus didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence felt like a recorder being set on a table. History was happening. I looked at the man who had taught the world to count power without flattering it, who had defined the Manacores so a child could know what they were reaching for, who had written the steps when the sky was still trying to be a poem. The man Luna had chosen first. The weight the slate mark name borrowed from and paid back every single day. 100 things crowded behind my teeth. Questions. Thanks. Complaints on behalf of all the people crushed by the weight of a perfect system. Jokes I would not tell because jokes are air and this moment was stone. I breathed. 4 in, 6 out. He turned. The world did not shiver. It aligned. The balcony became a balcony because he was standing on it. The room became a room because someone was in it who knew where rooms were supposed to go in a life. He looked at me like a ledger looks at an entry it recognizes. His gaze slid past the tricks I couldn't use here and weighed the one thing I had brought that mattered. Unity. Center. The fact that my blade no longer argued with my shoulder. Something that might have been approval didn't touch his mouth. It barely touched the air. "Julius Slatemark," I said, because saying a name correctly is a kind of bow I can afford to make. His head tilted a degree, as if he were listening to the rhythm of a city I couldn't hear. Then his eyes met mine. He did not look pleased. He did not look angry. He looked involved. "Arthur Nightingale," he said, his voice as level as a metronome. "You felt it. The frame under the perfume." "Empyrean order," I said. "Not her power. Yours. Stolen, wrapped, and used to drive this tower." "It is a good skeleton," he admitted, his voice even. "Even dressed poorly, it holds." He stepped away from the rail, and the air agreed to be still. He studied me the way I study footwork, hips, shoulders, breath, where the eyes actually live when they pretend to be polite. "You carry yourself like a man who has stopped arguing with his blade," he said. "Good. Unity buys you honesty. Honesty buys you options." "I'm learning to be smaller," I said. "Less talk before the motion. And less apology after," he said. And there it was again, the smallest tilt of his head, like a conductor testing a hall's reverb. "You came looking for the source of the tower. You found a story instead. Ask your questions." I hadn't planned to, but they crowded forward anyway. "Luna," I said, the name feeling both intimate and ancient. "You were her first contractor. But this place tells me her origin is older than your oath." "It is," he said. "Older and younger. If time were a road you could trust, I would give you mile markers." "It isn't." "Tell me anyway." He nodded once. "There was an Arthur before you. Not of our world, but one where our lives were printed as entertainment. He carried a great guilt for that, and a great love for people he could not touch. He refused to remain a reader, using a gift you now wear in pieces Mythweaver, when it still listened to him like a child to a father. He shaped Luna's soul from a story that should not have been able to breathe. Then he spent what grace he had left to send her down our river, not when it was easy, but when it mattered. "To you," I said quietly. "To this city. To a boy with too much structure and not enough pulse," Julius confirmed, without a trace of self-pity. "She made a contract with me on a morning when the city had 3 heartbeats and none of them agreed. She held me together long enough for me to hold us all together. That was her first job. She has been doing it ever since." I pictured it then. Luna, younger, with wheat fields behind her, offering her hand to a man who already carried a formal, structured future between his shoulder blades. The fit still hurt in a way I couldn't name. "And what did you do for the world?" I asked because I needed to hear it from the man who did it. "For a time," he said, "I made Earth boring." The simple sentence had a weight that could crack the floor. He looked past me to the old city routes he once kept clear. I stood on corners and raised my hand, not to command minds, to set a cadence. Freight ran on time. Hospitals didn't lose the seconds they couldn't afford. Small arguments ended in time for people to make dinner. When demons pushed up from the cracks in the world, the ground under our feet refused to help them. How long? As long as it took to teach the city to walk by itself, he said. Until the day something arrived that I could not set a beat for. A demon lord, I said. Divine rank. Yes. He didn't lower his eyes. He didn't raise them. Lysandra wore her courtesy like silk over wires. I lived because the city needed me to live. I died when that need no longer convinced the math. He watched me, seeing the ghost of relief hiding in my next thought. He didn't punish it. I lost to a category of being, not to a person. That should comfort you. And also, it should not. It did both, which was deeply annoying. I shifted my weight, suddenly feeling like a student again. I expected to meet a legend and feel competition, I admitted. Instead, I just want to take notes. Good, he said. Then take them with your feet. He pushed off from the rail. The room straightened itself by a degree I couldn't see. Draw when you're ready. Valeria woke in my hand, humming with a bright, sharp energy. No pressure, she said in my mind. Just history watching. Proceed, Erebus added, and somehow the single dry word helped. Draw when you're ready, Julius said. I was ready. I drew. The motion was the one I had just spent an eternity perfecting. No preload, no heel stamp, no whisper from my shoulder. The blade was already moving, and I was simply invited along for the ride. It was a perfect zero-tell cut, the kind of attack that had served me against men and monsters. Julius didn't flinch. He didn't counter. He let my blade arrive, and then he showed me the tax I didn't even know I was paying. He shifted nothing. He simply subtracted something. A patch of space that would have made my cut feel comfortable and clever simply wasn't there anymore. The line of the cut still existed. The edge still landed. But it felt awkward, ill-fitting, like a well-tailored suit that had shrunk in the wash. It stopped being safe to be in love with the motion. I adjusted, my body automatically seeking a more stable line for the recovery. He stole the next convenience, too. Every time I moved, the room declined to assist by exactly the amount of help I would have asked for without knowing it. The angles were still angles. The timing still worked. But the ground, my old, reliable partner, refused to conspire with me. Your sword is fine, Julius said, his voice even. Your assumptions are noisy. He stepped. It wasn't fast. It wasn't slow. He simply arrived in front of my guard without my eyes ever getting a receipt for the journey. His blade was suddenly occupying a space I had been saving for a later thought. I parried out of pure, trained habit. The parry worked, and in doing so, it told him everything he needed to know about my training, my reflexes, and my fears. He didn't punish the parry. He simply edited the context around it so that punishing it would have been redundant. You still answer, he said. Now start. I tried to start. I tried to steal the half-beat that had been my bread and butter for years. But he refused to publish one. I tried to initiate to be the first question in the room. He was already standing in my start, like a person who had arrived early for a meeting and brought their own coffee. My blade's point landed a breath from his coat and simply lost its argument. It wasn't blocked. It just became less true than the firmness of the place he had chosen to be. Again, he said. I changed my tempo. He took tempo off the table. I tried to create an angle. He shortened the angle until it was a question that couldn't afford to ask itself out loud. He was quietly, methodically showing me how often I leaned on the world to complete my sentences for me. You can write, he said, his blade a quiet line between us. Or you can let punctuation do the work. Punctuation is very busy. Stop asking it for help. I took that personally. I stopped asking. I disengaged and reset, my mind racing. All my advantages, my speed, my half-beat counters, my ability to read an opponent's rhythm, were built on the premise that my opponent had a rhythm to begin with. Julius had none. He was a state of being. I breathed in for out 6. I stopped trying to be clever. I cut without trusting friction, or echo, or the floor's good graces. The blade felt heavier, but in an honest way, not a tired way. It landed where it landed. My feet accepted the verdict of the stone. He nodded once, a minimal academic gesture. Better. We went 3 exchanges without contact. Then 4. Then 9. He never swung his blade, and yet somehow I never owned the room. His presence was a curve that denied all my favorite lanes. My shoulders wanted to grumble and get involved, to add some power, some drama. I did not let them vote. Again, he said, and I heard a kind of instructional kindness in it. This wasn't a fight. It was a lecture with consequences. We ended the lesson without a single drop of blood being spilled, which felt both wrong and exactly right. He stepped back to the rail. The balcony remembered him and held still, the way good bread holds a knife. The original Arthur made Luna, he said, as if we had never stopped talking. He sent her to me. I did my part with her help for long enough. Now the world has you in it, with your guilt and your jokes and your habit of doing the right thing only after you're done arguing with yourself about it. You make it sound simple, I said, catching my breath. It isn't, he confirmed. That's why it works. He glanced toward the threads of order sleeping in the wall. Lust wears this place like a decoration. She thinks a beat is a collar. She's wrong. A beat is a promise. You keep it for the people who need you. You break the collar. You died when she stepped in, I said, because that part still mattered. I died when a category of being arrived. He corrected me patiently. Don't make me your floor. Make me your ladder. Then climb. He looked me over one last time and I saw a message under the evaluation. We are on the same side of something that does not care. Rest, he said. Then we'll make your shoulders forget even more of their bad habits. Yes, sir, I said, because some people you don't pretend to be cool around. Valeria's hum was bright with a new kind of energy. He likes you, or he likes yelling at you. Both are forms of mentorship. Proceed, Erebus said. I rested against a wall that was now proud to be a wall. I drank water that tasted like work. Then I stood, rolled my wrists, and accepted the day I had been given. Again, Julius said. We both smiled a little. That was new. Again, I answered. We started again with empty hands. Julius insisted. It felt strangely disrespectful to Valeria, like leaving a part of my own mind in the other room. She forgave me, on the grounds that watching me get humbled would be highly entertaining. No blade, he said, stepping to the center of an imaginary circle on the floor. Swords let you hide the truth in steel. Today we hide nothing. I mirrored his stance. Feet set under hips. Hips stacked under the spine. Hands loose at my sides. The only metronome allowed was the steady foreign 6 out of my own breath. The tower leans on you, he said, his voice calm and instructional. It pushes with threads, lanes, and suggestions. You've learned to ignore the push. Now you must learn to deny the pull. How? Stop needing help, he said and moved. It wasn't speed. It was simply arrival. He was suddenly where my guard thought it was going to be, without ever taking the path I was prepared to read. I reached out to frame his shoulder, to establish a point of contact. He wasn't there, because the shoulder I had reached for was a courtesy he extended only to people who had not yet been introduced to consequences. Don't chase, he said. I didn't. I set my weight softly on my front foot and offered him a space that both invited a line and refused to host it. He tested it. The test arrived with no story attached, a simple pressure against my forearms. I felt it with the part of me that had stopped trying to narrate the fight. Better, he said. Now. Take the tempo away from me. I tried to steal the half-beat I had been living on for years. He simply refused to publish one. I tried to start the exchange instead. He was already standing in my start, like a person who had arrived at the designated spot early and brought coffee. You begin with breath, he said, analyzing my failure. Good. Then you tell your hips what you are planning. Less good. Let the breath tell the hips later, as an afterthought. First, let your breath tell the floor to stop caring about your plans. Stop caring. The floor should accept you as geology, not as drama, he said. I exhaled and let the end of the 6 count tip my weight forward. My hips followed a moment later because I had been kind enough to inform them after the fact. He moved again, his interest peaked. His hand rose, not to strike, but to indicate a corridor of opportunity one didn't know I had just opened in my own defense. I closed it without changing my shape. He approved with his eyes, a look more flattering than any compliment I had received in a month. Again, he said. We danced without stepping, shifting weight and pressure in a space no wider than a doorway. Then, with steps so small the tower couldn't properly tax them, he let me try to steal the tempo again. This time, I didn't chase the beat. I let my attention widen until his readiness looked like a puddle in a parking lot that I could simply choose to walk around. There, he said. Now add steel. But don't let the blade become the point of the exercise. Valeria slid home into my grip. She hummed in a register that said she would be dignified about this and also that she would be taking names later. Short guard, he commanded. Tip quiet. We began. I started. He denied the help I subconsciously expected from the air at the edge of my reach. I didn't apologize with my posture. I made the blade a quiet, simple truth instead of an argument. He let it arrive near his coat. The point stopped exactly where it should. He nodded. The nod said, "You can be trusted to exist near other people with that thing in your hand." Next, he said, "Don't steal the half-beat. Remove their right to start." How, without swinging? He simply stepped into my life without speed. Just arrival. Suddenly, any start I wanted to take would have been a gift I was giving him. My first attempt died in my chest. My second lived only because I kept it small and deeply uninteresting. There, he said. Stillness that hurts. Own that space. Again. He stood with his feet in a place I would have called neutral. His shoulder line was honest and uninteresting. He looked like a man deciding whether to pour tea. And I could not find a way to start an attack without giving him a piece of information I didn't intend to. I hated it. I also loved it. We drilled until sweat made my collar honest. He never changed his speed. He simply changed my need for speed. By the end of the lesson, my own starts were small, and my follow-throughs existed only because they were already over. Now we test, he said, and drew his blade. His sword was ageless, a simple length of steel that had no interest in being famous. It sat where it sat, and the lines of the world became simpler when it was there. He attacked. It wasn't a flurry. It was a walk through a room that happened to be my guard. I met him at short guard, tip quiet, wrists loose. He tested the place where my wrist would normally panic. Didn't. He tested the habit that likes to turn a good bind into a better speech. I kept the speech for later. He approved. And then he removed the concept of later entirely. He broke my sense of time into individual grains. Not with magic. With sheer, unrelenting insistence. Each grain, each tiny moment, had to justify its own existence. I ran out of justifications by my third habit. He watched my third habit arrive, find itself without a purpose, and die. He did not gloat, which was somehow worse. "You don't owe the future anything," he said softly, his blade resting in a place that would have become my throat if he had decided to finish the thought. "Pay now. Leave exact change." We restarted. I paid now. I didn't tip. Felt mean. He called it clean. He showed me a way to turn my own stillness into a pressure that bent his choice of attack, without it looking like I was doing anything at all. I began to treat my blade like the last honest thing in a noisy day. The blade approved. "Again," he said. By the time we stopped, I wasn't out of breath. I was out of shortcuts. It was a better kind of tired. Julius wiped his blade once on a cloth, and it became scenery again. "You have the frame," he said. "What keeps you back from the next step fits in a handful of words. You still expect cooperation from the world, and you still apologize with flourish when it doesn't arrive. Stop expecting, stop apologizing," I recited. "Yes," he said. And stop asking distance to help. You love to change the range of a fight. So do demons. Serve them boredom instead. Boredom is very safe. Valeria chuckled in my mind. Imagine the world's strongest swordsman winning through sheer, weaponized boredom. Not winning, I said to myself. Surviving. Proceed, Erebus said, which in his language meant he was proud. Julius nodded to a door that hadn't been there a moment ago. Water. Then we put knives back in the world and see if your feet remember the lesson. We drank. We stood in a silence that wasn't empty. He watched the hall until it behaved. I felt the tower's own threads of order lean in, curious and irritated at this pocket of unauthorized instruction. Ready, I said. Again, he answered. And this time he didn't add please. We broke for water. The room hummed once, a quiet acknowledgement, and remembered it was supposed to be quiet. My shoulders had been behaving for almost an hour, a fact that made me unreasonably proud. Then Julius ruined the moment by raising his blade again, this time with a look that said the next lesson was about to hurt in a different way. Last piece, he said. Stillness that hurts. He did nothing, and his nothing ate all of my options. He wasn't heavy. He wasn't loud. He was simply the end of my favorite excuses. My first idea for a start died in my chest before it could be born. My second lived, but only because I made it excruciatingly boring. He approved by not moving. He took it away from me anyway, just to prove that his approval wasn't a form of safety. Put your center in his way, he had said. Not your blade. Your blade is garnish. Your center is the meal. I let the feeling I associated with a good, honest answer expand from somewhere behind my sternum and into the air between us. Felt silly. It worked. He adjusted, and for the first time in our entire session, he adjusted like he had to, not because he was being generous. Again, he said, and it sounded like a quiet note of thanks. We broke for the last time without a single drop of blood being spilled. My forearms buzzed with a clean exhaustion. My knees remembered their job. My spine felt taller in a way that had nothing to do with pride. Julius lowered his blade, and it became a simple object again. He was no longer a swordsman. He was a man standing on a balcony, and that was somehow more impressive than any stance. The lesson on the blade is done for now, he said. You still lean on tempo theft. You still invite cooperation from the terrain. You still give me the afterglow of your cuts to play with. Fix those three and you can call yourself dangerous. Fix them here, and the tower will stop trying to teach you the same lesson. He paused, his gaze sharpening. But your sword is not your only tool. Show me your gray. I hesitated. It's unreliable here. The tower taxes it into ash. Because you use it like a panicked librarian tearing a page from a book to dodge a thrown rock, he said, his critique brutally accurate. It's effective, but it's wasteful and artless. You are a myth weaver. It is time you learn to write, not just tear. He gestured to the empty center of the room. As if on cue, a dozen small portals opened in the walls, and from them shot bolts of pure kinetic force. They weren't overwhelmingly powerful, but they were fast, relentless, and their trajectories were designed to box me in. My first instinct was my old, reliable trick. I created a seam in the air, a momentary tear in the page of reality, and stepped through it, letting a bolt pass harmlessly through the space I had just vacated. See, Julius's voice was calm, but carried the pointed edge of a teacher. Wasteful. You spent the energy to fold an entire room, just to move your body 3 feet. A flea using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I tried to block one with a 9-circle shield. The tower taxed the effort, and the shield was flimsy, shattering on impact. The feedback rattled my teeth. You cannot overpower the room's hostility, Julius said. You must give it nothing to be hostile about. Stop tearing pages. We've won. He gestured again. The bolts kept coming. Weave a shield of gray, he commanded. Hold it. I tried. I reached for pure light and deep dark, for the two halves of the truth that created the gray. I tried to pull them together not into a fleeting seam, but a stable, flat sheet. It was like trying to hold two powerful, opposing magnets together with my bare hands. A shimmering, book-sized page of gray flickered into existence before me. It held for a half-second, then collapsed as the two constituent energies repelled each other. A kinetic bolt shot through the space and took a piece of my sleeve. "Your foundation is strong," Julius said, ignoring my failure. "Your hands are not. You are trying to force the page to exist. You are still treating it like a spell you construct. The gray is not a construct. It is a state of being. Give it an honest reason to exist, and it will stay." I tried again, this time remembering the lessons of the blade. Stillness. No preload. No drama. I didn't try to force the two elements together. I created a quiet space in my mind, a point of perfect, boring balance. Then I invited pure light and deep dark to meet there. I didn't command them. I offered them a place where their opposition was not a conflict, but a necessary and stable truth. A page of gray shimmered into existence. It was smaller this time, palm-sized, but it was stable. It hung in the air, a rectangle of quiet impossibility, cool and indifferent. Kinetic bolt struck it. The bolt did not bounce. It was not blocked. It simply passed into the page and vanished, as if it had entered a reality where it had never been fired at all. The page of gray held. "Good," Julius said. "Now make it bigger. And hold it." For the next hour, that was my only work. I stood in the center of the room, enduring the relentless barrage of kinetic bolts, and practiced weaving. I learned to make the page wider, thicker. I learned that it required a state of constant active balance, a mental posture as demanding as any physical stance. The moment my focus wavered, the moment I tried to force it, the page would collapse. "Excellent," Valeria commented after I successfully held a shield the size of a door for a full minute. "Magical architecture. Far more dignified than sweating. Can you build me a nicer sheath?" The synthesis of foundational elements into a stable, complex construct, Erebus noted. "This is the logical progression." "The lesson is not the shield," Julius said, dispelling the bolts with a wave of his hand. "The shield is the vocabulary. Now you will write a sentence." He pointed to a small stone cube on the floor near his feet. "Move that cube to the other side of the room, without it crossing the space in between." I stared at him. "A fold? A wormhole?" "A sentence," he corrected. "A sentence that says, 'This object is now here, not there. The space in between is just punctuation.'" This was a different order of magnitude. A shield was a static defense. This required actively manipulating the geometry of the room. I tried. I focused on the cube, then on a spot 20 feet away. I tried to weave a page of gray that connected the 2 points. It was like trying to thread a needle in an earthquake. My first 3 attempts failed, the gray collapsing into useless dust. "You are thinking about the path," Julius critiqued. "Stop it. There is no path. There is only here and there. Make them touch." I took a breath. I stopped thinking about the space, the distance, the how. I focused on the 2 points as a single paradoxical truth. I wove a page of gray, not as a bridge, but as a fold, creasing the paper of the world until the 2 points were adjacent. A shimmering vertical seam, no wider than my hand, appeared over the cube. An identical seam appeared on the far side of the room. I gave a small mental push. The cube slid into the seam and vanished. A moment later, it slid out of the other seam and settled on the floor. I let the fold collapse, my head swimming with the effort. "Better," Julius said. "Your sentence was clumsy, but the grammar was sound." Again. We drilled that for another hour. I moved the cube. I moved my sheath. I moved a loose stone from the floor. Each time, the fold became easier to create, more stable. I was no longer just tearing pages to dodge. I was folding them to rewrite the layout of the room. "Final test," Julius said. "Create a structure. Weave multiple pages together. Give me a corner." This was the final synthesis. I had learned to make a page. I had learned to fold a page. Now I had to make them work together. I planted my feet. my mind holding the lessons of stillness, balance, and quiet insistence. I wove a page of gray, a 5-foot square of stable reality, and held it vertically in the air. Then, my mind screaming with the strain, I wove a second page, perpendicular to the first, and stitched its edge to the first one. A perfect, 90-degree corner of impossible gray stood in the center of the room. It was a solid, undeniable piece of architecture made of nothing. It held for a full 10 seconds before I lost my focus and it dissolved. I stood, panting, sweat dripping from my brow. I was more exhausted than I had been after any physical spar. Julius walked over and stood where the corner had been. He looked at the empty air, then at me. "You have learned to write a new kind of sentence," he said. "One made of space. This is gray weaving. It is the beginning of true mastery. Rest. Tomorrow we will learn how to make your words mean something." I stood in the center of the quiet training hall, the memory of the gray corner I had just woven still sharp in my mind. For the first time since entering this tower, a piece of my magic had felt like my own again. The exhaustion was deep, but it was the clean exhaustion of progress, not the fraying exhaustion of survival. Julius let the silence settle for a moment, his gaze analytical. "You have learned to write a new kind of sentence," he said, acknowledging the corner that was no longer there. "One made of space. That is a crucial step." He paused and his focus sharpened. "But you carry 4 pens, and you have only been using one." He was right. My sword was my foundation. The gray was my tool for geometry. But my other gifts had been relegated to minor, personal tasks. "Your myth weaver fails," he stated, not as a criticism, but as a diagnosis. "When you entered, you tried to write a law. The tower taxed it into nothing." "Why?" "It was a complex spell," I reasoned. "The tower punishes complexity." "No," he corrected instantly. "The tower punishes lies. And your sentence was a lie." He gestured to a loose stone on the floor, no bigger than my fist. "Your first day, if you had tried to write, 'This stone is a bird,' the tower would have laughed at you. Instead, you wrote all speech plain. You tried to impose a grand, overarching rule on a place whose very nature is to deceive. You wrote a beautiful, complicated falsehood. Your words had no authority because you, yourself, lacked it. You were asking, not stating. Today you will learn to state." He pointed to the stone. "Tell that stone to be heavy." Felt like a ridiculous exercise. I focused my will, drew on the dregs of my magical reserves, and spoke the words, trying to infuse them with power. "This stone is heavy." Nothing happened. The words left my mouth and dissipated into the indifferent air. "You are trying to make it heavy," Julius critiqued. "You are projecting force, trying to impose a change through sheer power. That is a brute's magic. Mythweaver is the art of the poet and the lawyer. You do not force reality. You convince it. To convince it, you must first speak a truth it already knows." He guided me. "Clear your mind. Forget what you want the stone to do. Find a truth about it. Use the stillness we have practiced. Use your harmony, not as a shield, but as the ink for your words." I took a breath. 4 in, 6 out. I let go of the frustration, the desire to succeed. I let the quiet of my own center expand, my personal-sized loosened harmony. I looked at the stone. I didn't see a target. I just saw it. A simple piece of rock. I found the most fundamental truth I could. I opened my mouth and spoke one word, softly, imbued with the quiet certainty of my harmony. "Is." The word hung in the air. It didn't glow. It didn't echo. It just was. It was stable, untaxed, and undeniable. The tower had nothing to say about it, because it was the truest sentence I could possibly speak. "Good," Julius said. "You have its attention. Now build on that truth." I kept my focus. "This stone is," I repeated, then added the next layer. "This stone has weight." The stone on the floor visibly settled. It didn't suddenly become a boulder, but its presence on the floor became more absolute. It had been a rock. Now it was a paperweight for the world. I had written my first edict. You did not tell it to be heavy, Julius explained. You reminded it of a truth it already possessed, and in doing so you gave that truth authority. That is the weight of a word. For the next hour, that was our only drill. I practiced writing simple, true edicts. I walked to a section of the floor that, I now realized, had a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt. I projected my harmony and stated, "This floor is level." With a soft groan of settling stone, the tilt corrected itself. A light in the corner that had been flickering caught my attention. "This light is steady," I declared. The flickering stopped. I learned the rules. The edicts had to be simple, rooted in a potential truth, and spoken with the absolute certainty of my harmony. I couldn't write "This wall is a door," a falsehood, but I could stand before it and write, "This is a wall," and feel it solidify, reinforcing its own nature, making it more resistant to illusion or gray weaving. "Finally," Valeria said from my mind, "the part where you get to be bossy. Try writing Valeria gets a new coat. I'm sure the universe will agree it's a fundamental truth. The imposition of conceptual authority over a physical state," Erebus noted. "A significant developmental milestone." "The physical is simple," Julius said, as if hearing my thoughts. "Now, the conceptual." He made no grand gesture. But suddenly, the air in the room grew cold, not with a drop in temperature, but with a feeling. A low, creeping dread settled over the space. A sourceless anxiety that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It was a hostile magical effect, a wave of pure fear. My first instinct was to raise a shield, to use harmony to push it away. "Don't block it," Julius commanded. "Unwrite it." I understood. A shield was an argument. It acknowledged the fear's right to exist by fighting it. I had to deny its very premise. I closed my eyes, centered myself in the now familiar stillness, and let my harmony be the only truth in the space my body occupied. I looked at the encroaching wave of dread. I did not see it as a threat. I saw it as a lie. I spoke a new edict, my voice clear and calm in the anxious air. "There is no fear here." The hostile energy did not break against a shield. It did not shatter or recoil. It simply dissolved. It unraveled like a poorly tied knot, unable to exist in a space where its core concept had just been declared fundamentally untrue. The air was clean again. I stood, breathing steadily, the quiet power of the act settling in my bones. I hadn't used force. I hadn't used a counterspell. I had used a single, true sentence to edit the world. "That," Julius said, a note of profound approval in his voice, "is the weight of a word." We spent the rest of the session practicing this new art. He threw illusions at me, and I unwrote them with "What I see is real." He tried to create phantom noises to distract me, and I canceled them with "The only sound is my own." Each edict was a small, quiet miracle of control, a perfect synthesis of the stillness I had learned with the blade, and the truth of my own harmony. "You now have a tool to control the physical and a tool to control the conceptual," Julius said as the lesson drew to a close. "You can weave space with the gray, and you can state truth with Mythweaver. You are no longer just a swordsman reacting to the world. You are beginning to learn how to tell the world what it is." He gestured to the door at the far end of the room, which slid open. "Rest. Tomorrow we will begin to put these new sentences together." I walked toward the exit, my mind buzzing with the possibilities. I had entered the tower and been stripped of my power. Now, piece by piece, I was building it back, not as it was, but stronger, cleaner, and more honest. I had learned to quiet my body. I had learned to command the elements of the gray. And now, I had learned to speak with the authority of truth itself. The climb was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I was learning to build the ladder myself. The next chamber loved the sound of its own voice. The moment we stepped through the door, the quiet ended. Shadows of a dense crowd slid across the walls, a silent stampede of ghosts from a train station at rush hour. The sound of 1,000 echoing footsteps came from nowhere in particular. A polite, disembodied speaker system, like one from a pristine mall, tried to put verbs in my bones. "Halt," the air said with cheerful authority. Submit, it added warmly. Kneel, it suggested, as if we were discussing appetizers. Valeria huffed, a sharp, indignant note in my mind. Ask me to kneel one more time and I will chip a tile out of pure spite. Erebus brushed the packed line, his presence a sliver of cold, hard logic. Posture, right? I set loosened harmony where it belongs, under the skin, quiet and level. 4 in, 6 out. No drama. The words from the speaker went looking for a hinge of habit to grab onto. I didn't offer one. The urge to be helpful, to obey a clear instruction, rose in my nerves, noticed there were no handles to grip, and slid off like rain on good wax. The crowd of shadows found a different game. Rhythm. Tiny, almost imperceptible sways rolled through the room, the kind of subtle, mindless motion that bodies fall into when they wait in lines. If I let my own stance drift with it, the floor would help by finishing my motion a fraction of a second early. A clever trick to steal my balance. Don't fight the words, Julius said from the doorway, his form a point of absolute stillness in the chaos. Just don't invite them in for tea. I let my eyes soften until the swaying shadows looked like nothing more than a screensaver, and I refused to borrow their metronome. The room then layered echo traps on top of the noise. My own footfalls were replayed a half-beat late, the kind of auditory trick that is designed to teach your own nervous system to trip over itself. Erebus, unasked, spread a whisper-thin null-cant curtain around my initiations. The echoes arrived with nowhere to hang their coats. Deny starts, Julius crooked a finger. Quietly, I let my stillness do the talking. Not a freeze, freezes are loud with tension. Just the sort of quiet that bends the choices of the things around you. An illusionary figure on my left, a shadow that had started to coalesce, tried to raise a spear. The start of its motion died without fuss, starved of the attention it needed to become real. Better, Julius said. Again. We added my own magic to the chaos. I used a fine mist of agar water, not as an attack, but to make the air heavier where the tower's push wanted to live. I lived pointedly elsewhere. A tiny lightning step, more an exhale of the ankle than a true step, moved me through a gap in the crowd. New policy, the speakers announced, cheery as a department store. Do as you're told. Do as you're ignored, Valeria muttered back. I tried talking back once, a simple, flat no. The word came out like a brick. It didn't stop the noise. It just made the room louder. Lesson learned. Words like that spend energy. Boredom spends nothing. Then the silhouettes decided to get personal. A shadow near the far wall sharpened, taking on the silver hair and cool, quiet grace of Seraphina. Another solidified into Rose's form, her auburn hair seeming to catch an invisible light. Rachel's shadow held a phantom lantern, Cecilia's a pen. Reka's stood with her perfect, unshakable posture. And in the center, a shadow with golden eyes, Luna's silent, powerful presence. It was a mean, ugly trick. My breath hitched. For a single, stupid heartbeat, my focus broke. An echo trap caught my footstep and I stumbled. A speaker, its tone now laced with synthetic sympathy, whispered, "Turn left if you love them." Don't. Julius's voice was a blade. I caught myself. I didn't argue with the shadows. I didn't promise them a safe return. I didn't try to banish them. They weren't real. My work was, kept my breath. I kept my stance. I kept my blade where I actually was. I ignored the phantom rose and focused on a gray seam at my feet. I ignored the silent judgment in the shadow of Luna and focused on keeping my harmony a quiet, steady truth inside my own ribs. I ignored the beckoning hand of the Rachel shadow and instead ran a zero-tell draw, the motion so clean and quiet the noisy room had nothing to say about it. The images smudged like chalk in rain. Their power lost the moment I refused to give them any of mine. Julius nodded once. "They don't need speeches from you," he said. "They need you to stop making noise." I ran my drills inside the storm of the tower's last, desperate distractions. Zero-tell entries across slick, treacherous tiles. Ghost binds that slid like a door that never squeaked. Short, honest thrusts that didn't ask for claps. After a while, the room's volume stopped being volume and started being weather. You don't negotiate with rain. You wear a coat and get on with your walk. Then, with a single, raised hand, Julius silenced it all. For one heartbeat, the chamber remembered it had been designed to be quiet. The echoes settled. The speakers discovered they were furniture again. The crowd of shadows dissolved. Even the light decided to be just light and nothing else. Now, he said into the profound silence, make the same choices. The noise is practice, not a requirement. Without the racket, every lazy habit, every tiny flaw, was suddenly obvious in the quiet. I caught my left thumb starting a motivational speech on the hilt of my sword and told it to get a hobby. I felt the afterglow of a clean cut trying to ask for my attention and let it die of natural causes from neglect. I didn't steal a half beat because there wasn't one for sale. I simply denied starts by being a place where a start was not a good idea. The chamber, offended by my newfound discipline, turned the floor slick in random squares. Agir wicked the moisture away from my path and laid it under a patch that wasn't mine. The wall tried to put my wrists on rails. Harmony kept them boringly independent. Tick, Julius said, and I felt it in the bones of the place. A tiny realignment, a quiet hum of approval from the core of the tower's order. The archive-like tidy work. It wasn't favoritism. It was good urban planning. The speakers attempted one last, desperate favor. You may rest. Generous, Valeria said. Deny it. I kept moving. The room sighed, the way a bureaucracy sighs when you hand in a perfect form and it has no choice but to file it without making notes. We finished with a nasty bit of timing practice in the new, weaponized silence. No beat, no help, no opposition. Just silence with teeth. I didn't go hunting for a rhythm. I let my own breath own the clock and made starts that didn't need applause. Again, Julius said, and we did 10 more passes for honesty's sake. The 10th felt exactly the same as the first, which was the entire point. When the door finally printed the words, "Please proceed," I didn't say thank you. Doors should not be thanked for doing their job. I paused at the threshold. The gates of transcendence were a cold, clear line on the horizon of my mind, like mountain peaks you only see when the air is clean. Not near, not far. Simply there. You will reach them by being painfully sensible, Julius said. I can do painfully sensible, I said. We stepped through, and the chamber behind us turned its volume back up, ready for someone else's lesson. I kept my own volume where it belonged. Inside my ribs, steady as a drum in a marching band that never gets lost on corners. The new room was a square with 4 pillars and a floor that looked clean enough to perform surgery on. Which meant, of course, that it was going to lie to me. The lie appeared as thin, shimmering lines in the air. The word no, stitched into the very fabric of the space. So faint you only noticed it after you bumped into one and the room tooted at you like a disappointed ant. Valeria hummed, a bright, dangerous sound. How many invisible fences can we poke before it writes us a ticket? Let's not find out, I said. Read first. Julius stood by the door, his hands behind his back. A level surface in a deceptive room. Stop trying to buy the space at retail, he said, his voice calm. Use what refuses to move. Use the holes. Use the parts of the room that aren't trying to impress you, he corrected. Questions first. Answers later. I set myself in a short guard, tip quiet, breath steady. The first cut I offered wasn't clever. It simply arrived in a gap that the room hadn't bothered to advertise, because boring thieves don't sell tickets. The edge went through like a letter sliding into a slot. The room, annoyed, shifted the seams. New no lines knitted themselves into the old ones, closing the gap. Fine. I didn't chase the holes. I made my own line inevitable by owning the beat right before it. Not with speed, not with a glare, but with the sort of quiet presence that makes starting a fight feel like a social mistake. Stillness that bends choices. Better, Julius said. Now angle. A thumb-width turn of Valeria's edge. Hips stacked without opinion. Suddenly, The path the room wanted me to take became a hallway with a chair inexplicably placed in it. My blade liked the new, awkward path. The floor, robbed of its little conspiracy, sulked. The pillars tried to help, their surfaces shimmering with hostile intent. I slid a thin shadow wedge over my left shoulder. Erebus obliged. The pillar minding that shoulder forgot its big idea and went back to being simple architecture. Then the range started doing tricks. The square compressed and stretched like taffy pulled by invisible hands. My job was to not make range a job. I let my stance do the math. Knee over toe, hip over ankle, my spine refusing to audition for heroics. Lightning step did its work in my ankle, not my thigh. Gray laid paper-thin seams where my feet already planned to be. I used them as if they had always been there. Add water, Julius said. I drew an agar lattice across the tiles. For quiet currents, 3 subtle delays, and 1 soft drumbeat of pressure underneath. It was a promise to the floor that it wouldn't be allowed to steal my momentum, nor offer it where it didn't belong. My steps landed honest. The room's attempt to skim my energy found nothing to skim. Then the horizon left. The walls stayed, but the sense of forward packed a bag and went on holiday. It's a trick that makes steady people walk like drunk giraffes. I put loosened harmony under my ribs and let my own breath declare which way was forward. I wrote a simple edict on the air. This step is forward. The world had to agree. 2 pages of gray flattened into the air at an ugly angle only I would love, and I didn't teleport. I just made a corner where the world thought there should have been a curve. My feet behaved. The room, mildly insulted, turned sweet. It opened a perfect, glowing lane, clean all the way to the far corner. I ignored it. Free lanes always carry invoices with small print and late fees. Remove, don't steal, Julius reminded me. Erase their right to start in your circle. I did it by preoccupying the pre-beat, that little half moment where people write checks their hands can't cash. I didn't push. I was simply there first in a way that made starting a fight feel unwise. An imaginary swordsman in my mind flinched and then pretended he hadn't. My blade didn't care about his dignity. The square produced a net of hard no lines, a mesh designed to punish any follow-through. The old me would have stolen a half-beat to get through it. The new me didn't owe the net a conversation. I walked into a line the net didn't admit existed, because it was too boring to advertise. The net adjusted, found nothing dramatic to bite, and remembered it was just a collection of strings. Valeria cackled, entirely without shame. You just heckled geometry into submission. Only a little, I said. Julius finally moved. He didn't swing. He simply denied me a start by existing in a place I hadn't yet assigned any value to. I began to begin, he removed the idea. I adjusted, he removed the apology. I went smaller, he let me have it. Now, he said, keep the range. No lunges. No heroics. Keep them close enough to be useful and far enough not to matter. The spar began. I threaded lightning step into gray seams and found the lazy band of distance that best fit my hands. The square tried to yank me deeper into a trap. The agar lattice underfoot declined on my behalf. I didn't owe the room my reach. We closed with a painfully honest exercise. Walking a circle with Valeria's edge an inch from a pillar, never touching it. The pillar did nothing wrong. I did not add any wrongness. When we finished, the pillar looked pleased with itself, which is not a sentence I expected to think today. That's enough, Julius said at last. You're building a habit of not asking the world to clap for you. It was never a great audience anyway. It was, he said dryly. You just can't afford the tickets anymore. The door at the far end of the room printed the words, please proceed. I didn't bow to it. Doors like that get ideas. At the threshold, I felt them again. Distant, cold, bright. The gates of transcendence, like mountain peaks on a studio clear day. Not calling, just existing. The good kind of pressure. Valeria bumped my thumb. We will look good on that climb. Only if we bring snacks, I said. Erebus. Mercifully on brand. Proceed. Julius's silence wasn't empty. It was approval on a budget. He didn't clap either. He just stayed, which for a man like him meant, keep going, don't show off, and don't trip on the way out. We stepped through. The polite square went back to being a polite square for someone else who needed to learn that no is just furniture with a good lawyer. My shoulders had one less speech to give. My feet had one more boring habit. Somewhere above, the film of lust thinned along an edge, and the bones of order showed through like a blueprint under cheap paint. Somewhere ahead, a balcony remembered how to be a balcony. Fine. One room at a time. One honest step after the other. And if the floor tried to help, I would thank it, forgive it, and politely decline. The stairwell didn't go up so much as it changed its mind about where up lived. One flight took me north, the next sideways, and a third insisted that down was now a lifestyle choice. Every landing was adorned with the same polished brass plaque. Welcome to the summit. It was lying. I've met honest villains. I've also met stairs. File a complaint, Valeria said from the quiet of my forearm, her tone bright and unhelpful. Dear management, your escalator cosplay is offensive to functional architecture. Erebus brushed the packed line once. Proceed. Julius waited 2 steps above me with one hand on the rail. He didn't glow. The stairwell simply behaved itself in his immediate vicinity, like a hallway that remembers it was designed by adults. This is not a physics problem, he said, reading the frustration on my face. It's a story that thinks it's clever. Don't argue with it. Edit it. With gray? I asked. And the rest, he said. You carry 4 pens in your hand. It is time you used them together. For pens, right? The gray to fold space, lucent harmony to keep my hand steady, soul resonance to listen to the room's intent, and myth weaver to write a line the room could not ignore. I set my harmony first. Not a glow, just a posture of the soul, and let my breath settle to 4 in, 6 out. The stairwell immediately tried to pump a feeling of urgency through the stone. A frantic, anxious rhythm that whispered, hurry, hurry, you're late. I didn't hurry. I let the calm fit my bones the way a scabbard fits a well-made blade. Next, soul resonance. I touched the place without biting, listening. A tower has a heartbeat, if you know where to put your ear. Underneath the chaotic, lying story of the stairs, I heard the old drumbeat buried under layers of velvet. The steady, tired, and deeply offended rhythm of Empyrean order. It was the true path hidden beneath the noise. Found it, I said. Julius nodded. Good. Now fold where the nonsense is thinnest. I pressed 2 gray pages together, book thin, honest, at the corner where the steps pretended to be an impossible loop. A clean fold, not a tear. The railing hummed once in brief complaint and then remembered that railings aren't paid to make decisions. The next landing I stepped on stayed where it belonged for an entire breath, which for stairs like these was a minor miracle. Short, clean edits, Julius said. This tower loves to punish flourishes. The plaques tried flattery next. You're almost there, hero. It was like a motivational poster stapled to a snake. Myth weaver? I asked. 1 sentence, Julius said. Don't make a speech. I opened the part of myth weaver that behaves when I behave and wrote in the margin of the landing, small and plain. This is not the summit. This is a stair. The words did not glow. They did not echo. They just sat there and made the truth heavier than the lie. The plaque's confident gleam dulled by half. The step in front of me stopped, pretending it was a door. The stairwell changed tactics again. The air thickened with voices disguised as directions. Turn left if you love them. Turn right if you don't. Up is mercy. Down is honesty. Loosened harmony kept my hands from twitching. I did not choose left or right. I chose forward, which is a very rude direction in a building that wants you to feel deep. Erebus eased a shadow wedge over the next landing. The wedge didn't snuff out the light. It snuffed out the room's attention. The place the stairwell had intended to be dramatic became uninteresting even to itself. We walked past without pausing for the monologue. At the 4th landing, the whole stairwell blushed with Lysandra's signature influence. The scent of silk and knives, of permission dressed up as power. The railing warmed under my hand like a touch you don't want to hold twice. She layered lust over order, Julius said. Perfume on brass. Strip the perfume, and the brass will remember itself. Soul resonance again, but softer this time. I listened to the knot where the glamour hung. It wasn't a spell so much as a suggestion that never shuts up. I mirrored a sliver of its grammar. Resonance doesn't steal. It just copies the shape for a heartbeat. Then I handed that shape to Mythweaver and wrote a quiet, binding edict. Your confidence does not apply here. The cloying scent thinned, as if the stairwell had finally taken a shower. The clean, steady hum of order came up from underneath. The next flight of stairs actually went up. It was revolutionary. Better, Julia said. Valeria's voice turned smug. We will put Problem Stairwell on our growing list of conquered nations. 2 flights later, the stairwell got petty. Each riser tried to finish my step for me, shoving my toe a fraction of an inch forward like an overeager dance partner. Not a physics trick, Julia said quietly. Identity theft. Keep your step yours. Harmony held my inner rhythm. Gray set a seam under my heel and then forgot it existed, which is the proper fate of all good seams. I used Mythweaver for one more sentence, a simple declaration of ownership written on the margin of the step. A step belongs to the foot that pays for it. The risers sulked and went back to being simple steps. I took another breath. The gates of transcendence were somewhere above us now, a feeling like mountain peaks on a day so clear you can count the scars on the stone. Not near, not far, just there. The body knows when a climb is honest. This finally was. Climb, Julia said, as if he'd heard the same cold, clear line in his own mind. On it. The last 2 flights tried old tricks with new smiles. False doors that led back to the landing you just left. A loop that tried to convince you were making progress. A motivational plaque that offered me a shortcut if I surrendered one minor title. I don't keep minor titles. The major ones are bad enough. One more fold, Julia said. I made a clean crease of gray through the plaque's pretty promise. On its back, I wrote in tiny, Mythweaver handwriting, no coupons. The letters felt like something my mother would have approved of. Sensible, a little rude, and true. The stairwell sighed. It was a sound of immense, bureaucratic exhaustion. It didn't throw me down the stairs or sprout fangs. It did what stubborn things do when they finally meet a stronger habit. It made room. I arrived at a landing that wasn't pretending anymore. There was no plaque. There was no perfume. There was just a single, black door with a simple brass handle that didn't need to be shiny to be important. Valeria lowered her hum to a contented purr. At last, a door that knows it's a door. Contact made. Erebus confirmed. Before you open it, Julia said, remember what brought you here. Not one trick. Not one speech. For tools used like they were meant to be. Do the same on the other side. I set my harmony where it belonged. A quiet truth in my bones. I kept the gray close to my knuckles. A folded page ready to be written on. I let my soul resonance fall very quiet. The way you listen for a heartbeat before a doctor tells you whether you imagined it. Mythweaver stayed in the jacket pocket of my mind, its cap off, ready to make one true line mean more than all the noise. I opened the door. The stairwell and the lessons it held ended. Of course it did. The vestibule beyond was the kind of quiet you only hear in old libraries and clean kitchens. Brass bones. Stone that doesn't care about fashion. Order not as a collar, but as a promise. If you put your foot here, it will hold. Finally, Julia said with the smallest, most fleeting of smiles. Now you're in my part of the building. The vestibule had 2 things. A ceiling that didn't need your opinion and a door that did. It was a heavy slab of black metal, fitted into a brass frame that had been polished by 1,000 careful hands over centuries. There was no latch, no keyhole, and no hinge. There was only a thin, perfect line down its center and a single, engraved sentence that hummed with ancient, impersonal authority. State your name. Bold? Valeria clicked her tongue inside my mind. Door here. Hostile etiquette, Erebus noted. His presence a cool shadow at the edge of my senses. I could feel Lysandra's influence here, but it was thin, a faint trace of perfume caught in the weave of an old heavy coat. Underneath it was the steady, metronomic beat of Julius's order. Not a rhythm imposed on people, but a rhythm set under them, the way a good road keeps an entire city from rolling an ankle. "Don't audition for it," Julius said, his voice almost gentle. "This isn't a courtroom. It's a gate with manners. It wants to know who is taking responsibility for what happens next." I set my loosened harmony down into my ribs, letting the calm settle not as a pose, but as a fact. The door listened with the impersonal attention of a machine that does not accept bribes. I could try to force it. I could try to use the gray to find a seam. But that would be an argument, and this door was not interested in debate. It had asked a question. "Soul resonance?" I asked Julius. "Touch and read," he said. "Don't chew." I reached out not to push but to listen. I placed my palm flat against the cool brass frame. My resonance extended, not to copy, but to perceive. The door wasn't alive, but it had memory. I felt the echoes of names spoken before, the weight of ancient vows, the taste of intentions both noble and corrupt. It wasn't listening for a title. It wasn't checking a resume. It wanted the identity, the core of the person who dared to knock. It wanted the name that would be accountable. "Myth Weaver," Valeria whispered, bright with mischief. "One line," Julius said. "No lies." I took a breath. I thought of my father's pride, my mother's worry, and my sister's fierce loyalty. I thought of the 6 women who held the world steady for me. I thought of my daughter's hand in mine. I found the name they all trusted. I put my palm flat to the brass and spoke it, my voice quiet but clear in the still air. "Arthur Nightingale. No second hero. No bloodlines. No list of gifts. Just the name I was teaching my daughter was another word for safe." The door considered me the way a dangerous errand considers a fool. The seam down its center glowed with a soft, white light. Then, with a sigh of brass like a relief you don't dare admit in public, the seam unstitched itself. The 2 halves of the door began to part. "See," Valeria said. "Doors like good manners." "Everyone likes manners," Julius said. "They're just allergic to long speeches." The seam stopped halfway. The opening was narrow. 2 people side by side would be a squeeze. That wasn't an insult. It was a policy. This tower, this system, wanted one decision at a time. The air that flowed from beyond the door smelled like clean steel and a storm that hadn't yet decided where it was going to rain. "The top floor," Julius said. "Not with triumph, not with drama. Just stating a fact. If he is there, he is not there to talk. Then we'll talk with the edge of the blade." Valeria breathed, eager now. I stepped toward the opening, and my soul resonance, still passively listening to the room, snagged on something. It was a tiny, discordant note in the otherwise clean symphony of order. A single wrong thread, a quiet pull at the edge of my perception, coming from the hinge of the great door. Not a physical hinge, but the conceptual one where the door's story met the walls. "She's got a fingernail in the hinge," I said. "Lysandra. One last, subtle trap. Cut it, or it will become an arm," Julius said. Simple. Careful. I stopped. This was the final exam. I brought up all 4 pens. First, the gray. I wove 2 pages, not to fold space, but to isolate it. I laid them around the conceptual hinge like a page protector, ensuring whatever venom was in the trap could not spread. Second, loosened harmony. I let it flow into my hands, not to project, but to steady them, to ensure they did not shake from haste or anger. Third, soul resonance. I listened to the knot. It was a beautiful, intricate piece of magic. Lust writes her curses like silk, but she counts her victories like a miser. I read the math of the knot, the tiny clause at its heart that said, "If tugged upon, scream for mother." A magical alarm, designed to call Lysandra's full attention the moment I tried to brute force the door. "Got you," I whispered. Fourth, myth weaver. With the trap's logic laid bare, I wrote one final edict. A sentence humbler than the last, imbued with the quiet finality of a closed book. "This conversation is over." Then Valeria. Her edge touched the nearly invisible seam of the trap. Not a swing, not a blow, but a snip, as delicate as a surgeon's cut. The hall brightened, not with a flash of light, but with a sudden, startling clarity. The tiny, persistent pull on the air, a tension I hadn't even fully noticed until it was gone, vanished. The last trace of perfume left the room. "Done," I said. Julius let out a breath, a sound so quiet it was almost just an idea. "The node is ours," he said. "For now. She can still descend if she commits, but there's no leash left to drag you by." "Good," Valeria said. "I only like leashes in metaphors." The far door, the true door to the summit, opened by itself. No fanfare, no horns. Just a line of air moving past us like a grace note in a quiet song. He was already there. Not summoned, not announced, just present the way the weather is present. A man in a simple crimson coat stood at the center of the roof, his back to the fake sky. His presence pressed on the air like a palm held over a candle flame, not to snuff it out, but to test its heat. He was peak radiant. Everything about him spoke of weight and purpose. The sword at his hip looked like it had opinions, and that they were mostly about ending conversations early. "The Archduke," Julius said softly, and the word was a fact, not a title. The man turned. His eyes were not cruel. They were busy. He looked at me the way a master craftsman looks at a difficult project, and knows exactly how many mistakes it will take to finish it right. Valeria went bright and quiet, the two behaviors she reserves only for company she respects. Erebus stationed himself at the edge of my vision, a silent bookmark in a chapter that was about to be reread. "He is not here for a formal duel," Julius said, taking one step back, a hand off the table. "He is here because you are alive at the top of his tower." The Archduke didn't draw his sword to threaten. He drew it because the next line of the story required ink. The blade cleared the sheath with no drama at all. The air in the room looked relieved to finally be useful. "Any last advice?" I asked Julius without looking away from the red coat. "Remember your name," he said. "Use all 4 pens, and don't give him your breath. He has his own." "Noted," I said. Harmony under my ribs. Gray near my knuckles. Soul resonance listening. Mythweaver's cap off, waiting for one true line. The Archduke stepped. Not fast. Just right. The roof found itself between us, and the first conversation started without anyone needing to say a word. The roof breathed. It wasn't the wind. It was a slow, heavy exhalation from the stone itself. Threads of a dark, oily miasma rose from the floor and lay themselves along the places my body liked to move, like a cat curling on the exact chair you were about to take. The sky above wasn't a sky at all, just a pale, glass ceiling pretending, its edges running into the tower's brass ribs. He stood in the middle of it all, a man in a red coat with working pockets and a sword that had seen hard days. There were no medals on his chest, no theater in his stance. He was the kind of man you only notice when something important is already over. "Arthur Nightingale," he said, as if checking a name off a list. "Archduke," I answered. The first wave of his attack came without a gesture. A dark veil of miasma slid in from my left, thin as smoke but heavy with intent. If I had stepped through it like a person who believed in coincidence, my knee would have met a shape it did not want to meet. A second veil drew a straight line past my ribs, at the exact height I habitually kept my elbow. A narrow blade of solidified miasma hung in the air to my right, drifting an inch closer every time I even thought about shifting my weight that way. Fine. We could be honest about it. Lucent harmony set itself in my bones. A quiet breathe in, a quieter breathe out. Hands with no opinions. A heartbeat that didn't grab for drama. A warmth slid across the roof a beat later, red hunger, his passive gift, a sweet little push that wanted my next success to feel important enough to earn a second, reckless swing. Harmony let the feeling pass, the way a closed window lets music go by. "Rude air," Valeria said from my forearm, her voice bright and offended. "It's sitting in our chair." "Proceed," Erebus murmured. I tested the medium with my own magic first. A short arc of lightning. No flourish, just a clean cut of force. kissed a veil and broke into a shower of tired sparks that sank and died. A flick of pressure at ankle height rolled under the narrow, drifting blade. The miasma drank the push and kept coming. I learned that fire only seemed to char the edges of a veil, making it stronger. The miasma loved heat the way gossip loves a party. "Water?" I said aloud, and pinched a thin sheet of it out of the air, agar clean and a palm's width. I dropped it into the nearest veil. The veil sagged, lost interest, and behaved like a piece of wet cloth. Good. Water worked. A second sheet of it weighed down the drifting blade. Its lazy, predatory drift slowed. The Archduke watched the changes like a mechanic listening to a stubborn engine. Head tilted, unimpressed, and already planning the next fix. His first cut came so ordinary I almost missed the point. There was no speed trick, no explosive noise, just a straight, simple line that did not intend to miss. Valeria turned, tasted the intent, and I stepped off the line at the last possible breath. The steel hummed past my ear, honest and deeply annoyed. His second cut was already arriving where I would have been if I had forced the parry. I hadn't. I let the edge pass and answered with a ghost bind that never settled. He ignored it and pricked low with a small piece of truth aimed at the top of my front boot. I moved before committing to any follow-up, and the truth spent itself on stone. He knew every bad habit my body kept in its pockets, and he kept his own very, very far away from me. I slid in for a test of my own. A gray seam under my lead foot, a tiny lightning step living only in the ankle, and Valeria's point aimed for a place where dull people keep their vital organs. A veil of miasma rolled into my lane. The Archduke flexed his offhand. The veil changed its mind and surged. A sudden, hungry wave. He meant to kill my line of attack after I had already trusted it. Soul resonance. I brushed his trick, copy, don't steal, one beat only. I took the little push that turned a veil into a wave and ran it through my own point. My line of attack kinked the same way his veil had, just for that breath. I skimmed under the surge and took a tiny graze off his sleeve where the red cloth met his gauntlet. There was no flourish, no second bite. I smothered the afterglow of satisfaction that red hunger tried to offer before it could even learn how to purr, and slid back out while a part of my body droned. Take another, come on, that felt good. His mouth almost smiled. Not at the pain, which was non-existent. At the method. He stepped in, his presence filling the space, and said, almost conversationally, "No breath shall steady." It felt like the roof had put a cold finger on my throat. Not choking me, just introducing a stutter. My exhale, the foundation of my 6 count, wanted to trip over itself. Harmony kept my hands from shaking. That was the only reason I didn't hand him a free exchange on a silver platter. He pressed through the wobble in my rhythm with a little 3-piece attack. A high feint to make my eyes go up, a true cut that wanted to meet a late parry, and a sleeve check that tried to tip my pelvis a single critical hair so that my next step would roll me into a waiting veil. I took the first 2 clean with short, ugly answers that had no poetry in them. I let the sleeve check hit a hastily formed bone shell from Valeria. The thin armor of light flexed, cracked, and shattered. "Rude," she said crisply. "He owes me flowers." The Archduke did not owe us anything. He rotated his wrist, and the surrounding miasma thickened near my elbows and my ankles, not dense enough to trap me, just enough to tax any meaningful correction I tried to make. Smart, mean, calm. I made a quiet stone lip rise from the floor to spoil one of his preferred lanes. I laid a finger-width air hook, an agar trick, into the nearest veil to tow it into the path of his next step. He didn't take that step. He took the one that made my clever hook catch nothing but my own pride. Every clean answer he had seen before. He wasted nothing. My sword work, which I had just spent an eternity refining, felt like a very nice screwdriver someone was insisting on using to paint a house. Fine. Sword, you're a tool, not a religion. Let's try being adults about this. He lifted his chin a fraction. Edges arrive late. It landed like a smirk inside the air. I began a cut. The world casually delayed it by a hair's breadth. Not much. but it was enough to feed anyone who hunts in the half-second after an attack has been made. I didn't push against it. Pushing just hands your opponent the receipt they want. I went smaller. Guard held close, blade moving only when I decided nothing, my footwork deliberately boring. I copied a single timing nudge from his own posture with soul resonance, turned it on my wrist for the one beat I needed, and my next tiny nick arrived on time. He tilted his head, acknowledging the adjustment, and sent a low miasma blade for the back of my calf after I had apparently finished moving. It bit empty space. I had already made that step earlier than the room thought I would, by moving with no finish at all. We were trading magic now the way professionals pass tools. He snapped a kinetic jab from his offhand at my knee while his sword ate a parry. I brushed it aside with a mean little sound crack that pinched his timing and bounced off his red coat without leaving a scuff. He was better. That much was clear. My breath kept trying to wobble, his didn't. My edge kept wanting to arrive with a story. His only arrived with bills. I felt the weight of the gates far above. A cold, distant ridge you only see on clear days. Not a call. Just an address. I was not there. Not yet. The Archduke slid 1 foot half a shoe width forward. The miasma followed him like a pack of well-trained dogs. He wanted to see if I would try to finish something, to make a grand, heroic statement. I didn't. I put my sword exactly where it needed to be to not die, and I let everything else wait its turn. His eyes warmed by half a degree. Not with kindness. With interest. We breathed wrong together for another minute. Mine wobbly by his policy. His steady by long practice. And then he let the vow on my breath go with a simple shrug of his will. The wobble stayed in the walls. It wasn't welcome near me anymore. I didn't grin. I would need the teeth for later. He didn't announce the next vow. It simply arrived, a quiet decision the room made while no one was looking. Distance is treacherous. The floor didn't shift or crack. Its intent did. The clean, reliable squares where my feet liked to land suddenly developed tiny, malicious personalities. The obvious approach lines acquired potholes that only a committed decision could feel. The very space between us became unreliable, seeming to stretch or shrink by an inch whenever I committed my weight. The Archduke moved the way good clocks move once and correctly. He slid into the middle distance and fed misdirection into the miasma with a flick of his thumb. A veil dropped from above like a set of closing curtains. An afterblade of solidified miasma drifted into place behind my right shoulder, as patient as gossip. He then launched a straight, sensible cut for the place my head would be if I did what habit and bad posture wanted. Soul resonance is for copying, not for lectures. I stole the one-beat redirect he had just used on his own veil and ran it through my ankle. My step didn't save me. It simply already wasn't there. The blade hummed through the space where my skull could have been and met a hastily woven sheet of agur water instead. The steel liked the water. It slid down its surface and sulked in a puddle on the floor. "Better," Valeria said, a pleased note in her hum. "Don't be where stories would put you." My harmony kept my spine sensible. The gray put 2 paper-thin, boringly reliable seams under the balls of my feet so that my starts belonged to me, not to the treacherous floor. I sent a palm-wide air blade into a veil, a clean edge with no mana fringe for the smoke to eat, and felt it cut straight for once. I sent a kinetic trip at his mid-shin. The Archduke flattened it with nothing but a shift in his posture. Of course he did. He drew a small circle in the air with 2 fingers, and the circle hit me as heat with impeccable manners. The hair on my forearm crisped. I turned it with a miniature, silent shield and felt the miasma appreciate the effort, trying to be helpful by filing into my shield's edge and weighting it down. Fine. I cut the spell pour and let the excess weight fall into a square of floor I wasn't renting. He stepped in. A short cut, a half step, a small change of angle. His blade rang on Valeria's guard and made her bones hum all the way to my palm. "Do not enjoy that," she said between her teeth. "I'm not," I said. I wasn't. Red hunger, his passive, cloying gift, slid its warm little hand into mine and tried to steer me toward a juicy, satisfying follow-up. My harmony politely told it to go bother someone else. The roof wanted me to be either too close where he could grapple or too far where his vows could stretch. I stayed in the ugly, annoying range in between, close enough to be honest, far enough not to be owned. He reached for my balance with a quick sleeve check of trained weight, just as a pressure pulse rolled at my ankle. I cheated with Gray, a seam a hand's breadth to the side, and let the pulse march harmlessly past a foot of empty air. He saw it. He filed the note away in whatever mental book minds like his keep open all day. Then he spoke again, the words almost too soft to hear over the hum of the tower. The vow snapped into place like a twig breaking in a quiet forest. No cut shall finish. Every follow-through I attempted immediately snagged on nothing, like a coat catching on a door you didn't see. I started to push back, to force a cut to its conclusion. Julius's voice came from the edge of the roof, a memory, flat and clean. Smaller. He was right. Finishes are a flavor, an optional dessert. I went bland. I abandoned any thought of a beautiful, arcing cut. My offense became a series of short, nasty, practical questions. Deny start, the pressure you put on the half-second before someone begins. Ghost bind. Not a lock, just two edges keeping each other busy with no promises. Short thrust, only as long as it had to be to count as a question. Reset. Again. 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 The miasma tried to congratulate me on my new, ugly style with a last-second hook. I stopped writing endings and it forgot what to grab. The Archduke didn't sigh, but the roof kind of did. He answered with ordinary magic used extraordinarily well. A tight sound pop that tried to miscount my step, a line of slick glass across the floor where I might want to slide, 3 ash motes that would be an annoying distraction if I let them. I shaped the wind to shepherd the ash into his next veil. I didn't bother with the glass because I wasn't using that line. I let the sound pop try to miscount me and counted my own breath instead. We collided again, and he finally gave me a present. Pain. It was a direct consequence of his vows. Distance is treacherous, made me misjudge my backstep by a single fatal inch. No cut shall finish made my parry feel sluggish, catching on the air. It was all he needed. His blade slid past my defense and came down hard on my shoulder. Valeria's bone shell flared into existence and shattered with a sound like breaking glass. A clean, hot line of pain seared its way from my collarbone to my bicep. "That's it," she said, her voice a furious hiss. "I'm charging him for damages." "Later," I breathed, because his next cut was already there. I understood his gifts now. Red hunger, the passive aura, a constant, warm invitation to be proud, to overcommit, to celebrate a victory before the fight was over. And Crimson Vow, the active, terrifying power to speak a law into existence. He wasn't just faster than me in the way a sprinter is faster. He was faster than me in the way a good habit is faster. No wasted lines, nothing gets stuck, and the start happens on its own because he never owed the end a single thought. I threw one big spell on purpose just to watch it fail. A lightning net, tight, heavy, woven with good intent, crashed into his veils and broke into a shower of useless, glittering hairs. The miasma ate the smell of my pride and seemed to want seconds. "Stop feeding it," I told myself. I went back to the things that work and don't clap. The Archduke took 2 steps, and every veil on the roof adjusted its position like a crowd taking its cue. He raised his blade in a modest, unassuming guard. His chin dipped the smallest amount. Took me a breath to realize what he was doing. He wasn't trying to beat me with speed or tricks anymore. He was cutting my options down to 1, and then making that one option incredibly expensive. My sword was a screwdriver, and the house was on fire. It was useful, but it was not the tool I needed to win. "Then be a different tool," Julius's voice echoed in my memory. I changed what I was doing, and the Archduke noticed before I had even finished changing. He pushed a veil into my offhand lane the instant my fingers thought about calling more water, and then punished my half-formed push with a plain, simple cut that would have separated 2 of my fingers from my hand if Valeria hadn't shouted in my mind and made me lift early. "Stop finishing," Julius said again in my memory. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I did. I threw away the last romantic, lingering feeling that my sword art should be the star of a day like this. The blade stayed, bright and present, but it was no longer in charge. "Good boy," Valeria muttered. "I mean that in a dignified, terrifying way." The Archduke moved his hand a tiny degree. I knew the next vow was coming, the way you know that thunder is going to land right on top of your street. All courage will shake. Not fear. Judgment. The tiny, internal push that says commit now wobbled like a table with a bad leg. My own harmony brought a folded napkin for that leg and moved on. The shake didn't stop, but it mattered less. We ran another minute that felt like a week. He did more with less. I did just enough with my tools. He was winning. That was fine. A problem you can describe is one you can fix. Right now, I just needed a bigger engine. The miasma kept breathing. The steel kept talking. The vows kept landing like quiet, unshakable verdicts. I had finally stopped pretending my swordsmanship could win this fight if it walked alone. It had been demoted from a religion to a screwdriver, and in doing so had finally become useful again. The Archduke turned distance into a liar with a single casual step. I let the gray file the 2 squares of stone my feet actually cared about into the category of ordinary. So his lies about the space between us didn't land there. He tried to sell me a perfect, open lane to his flank. I asked how much it cost, decided it was too expensive, and bought the ugly, cramped one beside it. He seated after blades of solid miasma in the shadow of my shoulder. I moved in ways that made my shoulders boring and uninteresting targets. He layered his spellwork with the effortless grace of a master painter. Each stroke a problem for me to solve. A ribbon of glass across the floor. A polite pulse of heat aimed at my eyes. A snappy, irritating pressure against my knee. I answered with the kind of magic that keeps kitchens from burning down. A tiny, focused gust of wind. A quick, palm-sized shield. A mean little sound slap. A patient thread of Aegir water. Nothing flashy. Everything necessary. He still owned every exchange. "If he breaks me again," Valeria complained as her bone shell deflected another cut that would have taken my arm. "I'm adding late fees and emotional damages to the invoice." "Noted," I said, parrying with no thought past the single inch of steel in front of my nose. This was the rhythm of the fight now. It wasn't a duel. It was a storm, and I was in a leaky boat, bailing water with a teacup. A veil of miasma would drift toward me, heavy with the vow that all courage will shake. Before it could touch me, I'd snag it with a whip of Aegir water and use a quick, ugly gray seem to dump the whole mess into a pocket of reality that wasn't my problem. That was one leak plugged. An afterblade would appear behind my back, ready to punish my next pivot. Erebus would slide a whisper-thin shadow wedge through the air, making the blade forget its purpose for a single crucial half-second. In that moment, my harmony-infused posture would allow me to shift my weight without a single tell, and the blade would cut empty air. Another leak plugged. The vow that edges arrive late was a constant, grinding tax on my timing. I couldn't afford to fight it everywhere, so I fought it where it mattered. I'd use Mythweaver to write a tiny, stubborn edict on my own ankle. This step is on time. The world is happiest with small, specific truths. My first step would arrive when I wrote it. The rest of me still paid the tax. That was bailing, not plugging. The Archduke watched me do all this, his expression unchanging. He was a force of nature, and I was a man with a very complicated series of chores. He chained it all together, the miasma veils, the smart spells, the short, brutal vows, all with no wasted motion, and pressed me into a 10-step circle where everything was wrong by a single critical degree, and every degree cost blood. A veil got under my guard and kissed my forearm. A black burn bloomed like spilled ink under my skin. I answered by wrapping the limb in a water ribbon, cooling the ruin into something my hand could still pretend was functional. He was better. My sword art, even at this new, refined level, was a screwdriver at a house fire. Useful, but you weren't going to put out the fire with it. I had to admit it properly. The sword is a sentence part, I told myself. A noun, not the headline. The roof seemed to hear me, or maybe it just ran out of jokes. For a single, blessed instant, an honest lane opened up for exactly the length of my reach. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't try to finish the fight with it. I wrote one neat, boring line with Valeria, asked nothing more from fate, and got a fresh, deep scar on his gauntlet leather that hadn't been there before. He checked his glove like a man noticing a wrinkle on a fine suit. And for the first time, his eyes sharpened with something that felt like genuine, analytical approval. Or perhaps just calculation. It's hard to say. Demons are very good at both. He pushed his blade forward again. The veils leaned in. The vows breathed in his lungs. The roof waited to see whether I would blink. I was going to lose at this pace. Not this minute. Not even in the next exchange. But soon. The boat was leaking faster than I could bail. Which meant I needed more room inside my own breath, a bigger bucket, or a different boat entirely. Above us, far beyond the glass and brass ribs of the tower, the gates of transcendence were a line of cold, clear blue. Not a call to glory, just an address. Place I was not. Not yet. Stop finishing, Julius's voice said a third time in my memory, because some lessons take 3 times to stick. I whispered to myself because this one finally had. Good, Valeria said, her voice cracked and fierce. Now cheat. I breathed in. I breathed out. And I let everything I wasn't using to stay alive simply drop away. It wasn't surrender. It was shedding bulk before a final, desperate swim. The gray was held close to my knuckles. Harmony was a quiet fire under my ribs. Mythweaver had its cap off, waiting for one ugly, necessary sentence when I found the seam. Soul Resonance was ready to steal exactly 1 heartbeat, if and when it would matter. He came on. I stepped into the worst part of the roof on purpose, a square of stone where 2 of his vows overlapped, and I made it mine for as long as I could afford to. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But the screwdriver was in the right hand, and the house fire had a door I could put a line through, if the time came. The screwdriver was in my hand. The house was still on fire. Miasma breathed off the roof in thin, dirty threads. They settled along the places my body liked to move, the way a cat settles on the one shirt you actually need to wear. The brass ribs of the tower framed a pale, fake sky that fooled nobody. The Archduke didn't rush. He closed the space around me like a craftsman closing a box. One neat, perfect side at a time. A veil sagged across my favorite entry point. An afterblade of solid miasma settled a hand's width behind my shoulder, as patient as gossip. He spoke, his voice quiet as someone giving advice to a friend they were about to execute. No breath shall steady. The roof put a cold finger on my throat. Not choking, just a stutter that lived in every exhale, like my lungs had been told a bad joke mid-sentence. He pressed through it with a clean 3-piece attack. A feint to make my eyes go up, a true cut right where a late parry wants to live, and a sleeve check to nudge my pelvis toward a veil that pretended to be innocent. Valeria's bone shell cracked again with a sound like breaking ice. Rude, she said in my palm. In voice later. He rotated his wrist. The miasma thickened at my elbows and my ankles, just enough to tax the corrections that mattered. I flicked a mean little sound spell at his timing hand and got nothing but honesty back. He ignored the noise and put his edge where it was supposed to be. I was losing. The ring was closing. The day was going to end where this roof pointed. He lifted his chin a hair. The next vow gathered in the air like thunder under your shoes. And then a window opened where no window lived. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in the way the room felt about warmth and honesty. A subtle pressure shifted. The light in the far corner of the roof went white and black at the same time. Not mixed, but side by side, like 2 crowns that refused to argue. The lattice of my own 9-circle circuits found a beat they liked without asking my permission first. Hello, Arthur? Lucifer's voice said from the rim of the roof. As easy as someone stepping into a warm kitchen. I didn't look away from the red coat and the blade. I didn't need to see him to know what had just stepped through. The air went sane for half a breath. The miasma veils shivered, unhappy with the new temperature. The Archduke glanced a single degree toward the new arrival and then recentered his focus on me, like a man who has found a mistake on an invoice but intends to sign it anyway. There was a small, cheap flicker of a feeling inside me that I killed before it could learn to stretch. Envy. He did this, changed the very feeling of a room like he was playing a note. I had been bleeding for months just for inches. My harmony flattened the feeling. The work was what mattered. The Archduke cut, testing whether a new sun at the rim of the roof changed anything. It did. Just a little. "Don't mind me," Lucifer said. He lifted his own blade, its edge a line of pale gold, and drew a simple circle in the warm air. His power, God's eyes didn't blink. He wasn't here to be the hero of my fight. He was here to make the floor honest. He traced neat, warm lines of light along the stone of the roof. Sunbrands. They didn't burn. They didn't attack. They simply revealed. The places where the floor liked to lie for the Archduke, where the vow "distance is treacherous" was strongest, now had a faint, chalk-like outline on the stone. The invisible paths where his afterblades preferred to drift were now traced in soft, golden light. For the first time since the fight had started, I could see the shape of the cheating. That didn't fix the problem, but it made my feet honest. "Use the air," Lucifer said, like a man mentioning the obvious. "Stop letting it decide where it wants to sit." He rolled his wrist. Heat rose in one corner of the ring by a fraction, creating an updraft as polite as tea steam. The nearest veil of miasma slid sideways, like soap under running water. No brute force, just a preference. "See?" he said. I saw. I hated how clean and easy it looked. I wanted to be petty about his talent. Harmony ate that feeling before it could learn to talk and left me with only the instruction. I copied the idea but made it my own. A swirl of Agar's cool to make the air heavier where it hurt me. A little air hook to encourage a veil to be somewhere else. Not divine, not clever. Just practical. The Archduke didn't waste a second pretending to be bothered. He slid his blade through one of Lucifer's sunbrand strands while speaking a new vow. Edges arrive late. The strand of light popped with a sharp hiss. A new oath scar, small and mean, walked its way along his collarbone. He had paid a price in his own power to break Lucifer's rule and keep his own. Deny start, I told myself. Ghost bind. Short thrust. Reset. Stack the starts. We traded. The room didn't tilt in my favor anymore. It just stopped tilting quite so much against me. His sleeve check found bone. Valeria cracked and complained about her fees. He used a glass ribbon under my slide. I turned it into trash with a hip shield and stepped high instead. Ugly and correct. He put a pressure needle at my mid-shin. I let it roll into a gray seam that didn't have any feelings. Red Hunger tried a new flavor. A warm permission to take a bow when you do something right. Harmony called it weather and refused to draw the curtains. Lucifer, from the rim, pinned something I couldn't see in the far corner. A thin, descending filament from higher up the tower that had been making the roof hum like a guilty tuning fork. The hum eased. The Archduke rolled the miasma into a heavy crown over my hands. A steady weight that wanted to creep into my wrists and write its own rules in my tendons. I moved my harmony out of my spine and into those joints, making them boring and honest. The weight found nothing interesting to bully and slid off to be useful somewhere else. Lucifer's sunbrands weren't permanent. They were moments of truth. He would trace a new one, showing me a safe path, and the Archduke would counter by corrupting it or paying the price to break it. It was a constant, high-level duel of rules being written and unwritten around my own fight for survival. "All courage will shake," the Archduke said again, and the room asked my body to wobble. The sunbrands showed me the lines where that vow was strongest. I simply chose not to stand there. Harmony flattened my courage into a choice that didn't care about applause. The shake kept tapping at my wrist.
"You chose anyway."
There is a point in a fight where the choreography stops being clever and turns into a budget report. The Archduke still had more to spend. But now I wasn't tipping the room anymore. He finally decided to say something directly to Lucifer. He turned his head a single degree and looked at the twin crowns of white and black. "You're late," he said. "The door was locked," Lucifer answered, his tone mild. He didn't move from the rim. He just kept the floor honest, for a few seconds at a time. He didn't need to do more. The window he'd opened was enough. It gave me enough air to breathe without paying a tax on it. I hit the wall again, the place where my choices were running out of budget. Where you either break or you break through. I wasn't breaking. Not yet. But the window had shown me where the doorframe was, and that was the first truly useful thing that had happened all day. Lucifer didn't speak. He just pinned a second descending filament with a quiet sunbrand so the tower would stop humming like a guilty instrument. He could have taken this fight away from me if he wanted to. He didn't. He made it honest, and he left it mine. The Archduke made one more sensible, perfect cut that would have ended most days. I met it, and I felt something inside me, something that had been holding its breath, finally stop asking for permission. The sunbrands were tidy lines of golden light laid against the gray stone, warm without being hot. They didn't fight the miasma. They simply traced the edges where the Archduke's vows wanted to sit, the way a pencil circle makes a spill of invisible ink visible under glass. For the first time since this fight started, I could see the shape of the cheating. That didn't fix the problem, but it made my feet honest. A small, ugly flicker of envy tried to stand up inside me. He does this like it's a simple note. I've been bleeding for months just for inches. My harmony sat that feeling down before it could learn to talk. It wasn't about raw power. Lucifer was a mid-radiant, same as I was, but his gift was different. God's eyes didn't throw thunderbolts. It read the fine print. He wasn't a stronger fighter. He was a better reader. For the first time since I stepped through the seam, I wasn't entirely alone in my corner of the ring. It wasn't a rescue, not in the way stories write them. It was a map, and after hours of navigating a hostile country by feel, a map felt like a miracle. "Use the air," Lucifer said from the rim of the roof, his voice calm, like a man mentioning the obvious. "Stop letting it decide where it wants to sit." I saw what he meant. He wasn't telling me to fight the room. He was telling me to have a preference. I took one steady beat from the lattice of his sunbrands, fed it into my forearm for exactly one breath, and then built my own version, small and practical. A swirl of agur cool to make the air heavier where it hurt me. A little air hook to encourage a miasma veil to be somewhere else. Not divine, not clever. Just work. The Archduke didn't waste a second pretending to be bothered. He slid his blade through one of Lucifer's sunbrand strands while speaking a vow. Edges arrive late, and the strand of light popped with a sharp hiss. A new oath scar, small and mean, etched itself along his collarbone. He had paid a price in his own power to break Lucifer's rule and reassert his own. Deny start, I told myself. Ghost bind. Short thrust. Reset. Stack the starts. Mythweaver put a tiny, stubborn label near my ankle. First step is on time. It wasn't a sermon. It was a sticky note with the force of law. We traded. The room didn't tilt in my favor. It just stopped tilting quite so much against me. His sleeve check found bone. Valeria's shell cracked and she complained about the fees. He laid a glass ribbon where my slide wanted to be. I saw it outlined in Lucifer's light, turned it into trash with a hip shield, and stepped high instead, ugly and correct. He put a pressure needle at my mid-shin. I let it roll into a gray seam that didn't have any feelings. He snapped a sound pop at my ear. I counted my own breath instead, and the number didn't change. Red hunger tried a different flavor, the warm permission to take a bow when you do something right. Harmony called it weather and refused to draw the curtains. Lucifer, from the rim, pinned something I couldn't see in the far corner. A thin, descending filament of power from higher up the tower that had been making the roof hum like a guilty tuning fork. The hum eased. His power kept the far corners of the room from inventing new, interesting problems while I dealt with the one in front of me. My shoulder was a hot, grinding knot of pain from the earlier hit, a constant screaming protest every time I raised my shield arm. The miasma burn on my forearm was a cold fire that Harmony could only contain, not extinguish. My lungs felt scraped raw from the effort of fighting the no breath shall steady vow. It was like trying to solve 3 different chess problems at once, while also being on fire and having someone occasionally throw rocks at your head. The Archduke, seeing his subtle advantages being illuminated and neutralized, changed his approach. He spoke a new vow, his voice a flat, architectural command. All paths will narrow. Lucifer's sunbrands on the floor flickered. The wide, safe lanes they had outlined shrank instantly to the width of a tightrope. The miasma veils on either side pressed in, their hungry edges now a razor-thin margin from the golden lines. One misstep, one loss of balance, and I would fall into a wall of corrupting energy. "Excellent," Valeria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now we're fighting on a knife's edge. Literally. Try not to fall off the metaphor." The Archduke pressed his attack, moving along the narrow lines with an effortless, predatory grace. He was forcing me into a battle of pure, claustrophobic precision. I couldn't use wide movements. I couldn't create space. I could only be perfect. My first step was a test. A tiny gray seam laid over the golden line, a pocket of ordinary to anchor my boot. It held. The next was a lightning-quick ankle shift to a parallel line 3 feet away, a move that would have been trivial on an open floor but was now a life-or-death calculation. I unspooled an Aegir water whip, not as an attack, but as a probe, letting its tip touch a sunbrand line 10 feet ahead to test its stability before I dared a longer leap. He cut, a simple, perfect line down the center of the path I was on. I parried, my own blade held in a two-handed grip for stability. The impact jarred me, and I felt my back foot slide a half-inch. The edge of the miasma veil kissed my heel, and a spiderweb of cold numbness spread up my calf. He had me pinned. He knew it. This was where he ended it. I did the only thing I could. I let go of the physical fight for a fraction of a second and focused on the conceptual. I looked at his blade, so perfectly controlled, so economical, and used Mythweaver to write a single, rude edict directly onto it. "Your edge is heavy." For a split second, the Archduke's perfect economy of motion was disrupted. His own sword, his own limb, suddenly felt unnaturally cumbersome. It wasn't a powerful spell. It wasn't a bind. It was a petty, conceptual piece of graffiti, and it was enough. His follow-up cut, the one that would have taken my head, was a fraction of a degree off its intended path. A conceptual imposition on a physical object, Erebus noted. Inefficient, but psychologically effective. I used the opening not to attack, but to breathe. I slid back along the sunbrand, putting a few precious feet of honest floor between us. The Archduke's expression didn't change, but the pressure in the room intensified. He had been testing me. Now he was annoyed. He let the narrow path vow dissolve, and the sunbrands widened again. He was done with finesse. There is a point in a long fight where the choreography stops being clever and turns into a budget report. A gray seam cost a spike of concentration. An Aegir ribbon cost a steady breath. A Mythweaver edict cost a sliver of certainty I had to earn back. He was spending coins. I was spending blood and will. "All courage will shake," he said, and the room asked my body to wobble. Harmony flattened courage into a simple choice that didn't care about applause. The shake kept tapping at my wrist, a constant, low-grade vibration of doubt. I chose anyway. Deny start. Ghost bind. Short thrust. Reset. He punished the next attempt at a follow-through, a ghost of a habit I hadn't quite burned out yet. I took the reminder, a shallow cut along my thigh, and threw the habit away for good. The next time my body asked me for a grand finish, I put a Mythweaver edict on it. Finish is a step, and the step served me. Not a bow on a package I couldn't carry. The Archduke finally decided to say something directly to Lucifer. He turned his head a single degree and looked at the twin crowns. "You're late," he said. "The door was locked," Lucifer answered, his tone mild. He didn't move from the rim. He just kept the lattice of truth up for a few seconds at a time, whenever the room got too smug about its own lies. The red coat recentered on me. He cut a line that did not need a speech. I met it with a parry that was exactly the right size and no more. A veil drifted into my lane, and I made it somebody else's problem with a short, rude hook of air. A pressure needle argued with my knee. Gray filed that square of space into a thoughtless yes. He was still better. I could feel it in the way the ring of his control wouldn't open and the way my shoulder ached with a deep, grinding pain. Valeria's bone shell cracked again, and she muttered about suing fate for breach of contract. Erebus slid a second shadow wedged through a place the room had planned to make into a trap and made it forget its purpose for a breath. "Stop finishing," Julius said a third time in my memory, and I realized I hadn't tried to for a full minute. I hit the wall then, the real one, the place where your choices are out of budget and your will is overdrawn. I ran a quick, desperate inventory. My energy reserves were screaming. My body was a roadmap of new aches and old pains. I had used every trick, every lesson, every bit of support from my allies, and it was still not enough. I was still losing. You either break or you break through. The Archduke stepped with me, not at me. The ring of his control closed one more breath. He did nothing new. He just did everything right. And something inside me, some final reserve, finally admitted that it wasn't enough to just be a screwdriver at a house fire. The roof was big enough for a bad dream. Brass ribs framed a pale, fake sky, and the miasma breathed like a sleeping, venomous animal. The Archduke didn't rush. He trimmed my space the way a patient butcher trims fat, one careful, irreversible cut after another. A thin veil slid across the lane my hips liked. A drifting afterblade waited half a step behind my shoulder. I was losing. It was a simple, mathematical fact. My sword was a screwdriver at a house fire. Red hunger pressed in like warm applause for a fight well fought and slid off the glass of my harmony. He cut, and I parried, and everything in that exchange was simple and ruinously expensive. His edge rode the shortest line without announcing it. Mine met it and did not argue. But the cost of the meeting was a shudder in the bones of my arm. He checked my sleeve with a touch of trained weight as a veil leaned into my elbow. Valeria's bone shell flashed white and cracked with a sound like heartbreak. "Rude," she said in my palm, her voice thin. "Invoice later." "There might not be a later," I told her. He was better. Not by a flash of genius. By a relentless lack of waste. Everything he did cost a single coin and bought him 2 seconds of advantage. Everything I did. Every gray seam, every Agur ribbon, every Mythweaver whisper, cost a coin and bought me 1.5. That half-second deficit, repeated over and over, is where fights end. A window of opportunity had opened at the rim of the roof. "Hello, Arthur," Lucifer had said, and for a moment, the floor had become honest. He had shown me the shape of the cheating. But the Archduke was powerful enough to pay the price, to break the honest lines and reassert his own corrupt grammar. Lucifer's help wasn't a rescue. It was a diagnosis. The report was terminal. I hit the wall. The real one. The place where your choices are out of budget and your will is overdrawn. My shoulder was a knot of grinding fire. The miasma burns on my arms were a constant, cold drain on my focus. My lungs felt scraped raw. He tightened the ring again, squeezing the last few feet of air out of my world. "All courage will shake," he said, his voice mild. The vow landed, and the commitment in my bones, the simple will to stand, trembled like a table with a bad leg. Harmony slid a folded napkin of calm under it. The wobble kept asking. I kept choosing, but I was running out of choices. He lifted his chin a hair. The next, and final, vow gathered like thunder under my shoes. It would be the one to end this. Something inside me gave way. It wasn't pride. It wasn't rage. It wasn't my body. It was a lock that had been rusted shut all my life finally, quietly, turning. The enlightenment wasn't a flash of light. It was a moment of profound, terrifying stillness. I had been trying to bail out the leaky boat. I had been trying to plug the holes. I had been trying to outsteer the storm. I had been trying to solve the problem. Julius's voice echoed, not as a memory, but as a present truth. Stop expecting the world to help you. Pay now. Leave exact change. Stillness that hurts. I stopped trying to solve the problem. I stopped trying to win. I let go of the fight, of the storm, of the boat itself. I just stood there, on the treacherous floor under the fake sky, and for the first time, I accepted the absolute, honest truth of the moment. And in that acceptance, the world changed. The desperate, noisy battle on the roof faded to a distant hum. I was standing in a quiet, dark space. Before me, I saw them. The gates of transcendence. The cold blue line on the horizon of my mind. The mountain peaks I had only ever seen from a great distance. They were here, and they were closed. They had watched men fail politely for 1,000 years. They did not clap. They did not judge. They simply were. The final barrier. And I understood. I had been trying to climb the mountain. I had been trying to kick down the gate. That was the lie. That was the assumption. You don't force your way through. You just have to be the key that fits the lock. It started behind my breastbone. A pressure like a door that had been part of the wall all my life, deciding it was a door after all. A single, clean click. My breath went cold, then clean, then easy, as if someone had just scraped the soot off the inside of my ribs. The gates of transcendence opened in me. There were no trumpets, no modest flicker. It was fireworks in a silent cathedral. The gray flared out from me, not as a weapon, but as a statement of fact. It came in flat, clean sheets of ordinary that sliced through the Archduke's miasma architecture like they were paper dolls. There was no noise, just new, clean edges where there had been none. The fake sky above the fake sky cracked, and through the fissure, a seam of not quite night flashed with quiet, distant stars that weren't there a second ago. The city far below, a place I had promised to protect, went silent for a single heartbeat, as if it was listening for a bell that only my bones could hear. The crown of twilight, which had been a faint halo of silver, solidified above my brow, cool and real. Lucent harmony widened out of me. It was no longer a personal shield. It was weather. It settled over the entire roof like a cool, morning fog. The warmth of lust that still clung to the brass ribs died at its threshold without offense. The petty, compulsive tricks in my knees and elbows lost interest and went home. The weight in my hands became simple and heavy and right. Valeria sang a long, low note, a sound like a bow being drawn across the cello of the world. Finally, she whispered, and for once, there was no sugar on it, just awe. I hadn't gotten faster. I hadn't gotten stronger. The world had just gotten honest. The little taxes on my movement stopped. The vows, no breath shall steady. Edges arrive late. Distance is treacherous. Were still there, but they were now suggestions, not laws. The ring of the Archduke's control stopped charging me for being alive. I had achieved sword unity long ago, a perfect harmony between my mind, my body, and my blade. This was different. This was sword accord. The room itself now agreed with the cut. The Archduke flinched. Not in fear, but in pure, professional surprise, like a master craftsman watching a tool in his hand suddenly become perfect. He pressed his attack anyway. He was a professional to the marrow. He threw a clean, simple line that would have ended most days, that would have ended my day 10 seconds ago. I met it, felt like pushing on a door that wasn't latched. My parry wasn't a desperate block. It was a polite redirection. First step is on time. Mythweaver wrote on my ankle again, but the ink was unnecessary. The step happened because I said so. Lightning walked in my tendons without drama. The gray kept the lanes of the floor simple. Harmony kept my house quiet. Soul resonance took the best, most steady beat from his own posture and played it back at him for half a heart, just to settle an old debt. The thrust that followed my parry wasn't deep. It didn't need to be. The world let it go where it was intended. White light cracked along the brass ribs of the tower. The entire structure shuddered once, remembered itself, and held. Lucifer's twin crowns blazed, then dimmed to a polite glow. He smiled, a real smile, like a brother at a graduation, and said nothing. I see it. Julius's voice echoed from the rim of the roof, and for once he sounded pleased. I stood in the ring with the door open behind my heart and knew, for the first time, that I had room. The Archduke looked at me, measured the new weight in the air, and set his feet for the last exchange. Again, he said, but there was a new, heavier meaning on the word now. It wasn't a command. It was a request. Again, I said. We moved, and the city below kept silent, long enough to hear me step through. The gate was open. The room stopped arguing with me. My lucent harmony, no longer a tight shield held under my ribs, settled into the walls and the floor. The gray flattened too plain, ordinary squares under my boots, not as a trick, but as a statement of fact. The crown of twilight hung above my brow like a streetlight that had decided to mind its own business. My breath was a steady, quiet engine, 4 in, 6 out. There was no wobble. There was no tax. Valeria hummed, a long, low note like a cello finding its pitch. "Finally," she whispered, and for once there was no sugar on it. "I was worried you'd make me retire before you did anything fun." "Hold that thought," I said. The Archduke watched me from across the roof, his expression unreadable, but his stance that of a craftsman observing a tool that had just impossibly improved itself in his hands. He was a professional to the marrow. He stepped in with the kind of clean, perfect cut that ends most days. I met him with something new. Sword unity had been me and the blade breathing as one. This went a step higher. This was sword accord. The blade and the room were now in agreement. The angles of the world stopped filing paperwork. They just worked. His edge slid from my shoulder. Valeria moved like a careful page being turned in a very old book. My answer, a short, boring, honest parry, went where it was meant to without me needing to ask the floor for favors. The floor gave them anyway. He blinked once, a flicker of surprise, and then added teeth. A ribbon of slick glass under my plan slide. A bead of intense heat to fog my eyes. A little sound pop behind my heel to trip my count. They were his old, reliable tricks. The gray made the glass ribbon uninteresting. A soft breath of Agur Cool turned the bead into a harmless puff of steam. I counted my own breath, not the echoes, and the sound pop sulked in the corner. My line stayed straight. From the rim of the roof, Lucifer didn't smile, but his eyes did. "Finish it," he said. The Archduke did the smart thing then and put all his weight behind purity. No more traps. No more taste of lust's influence. He spoke a final, heavy vow. No cut shall finish. He came forward with a clean, heavy strike meant to end this and send me to the floor. I let him meet the accord. I wasn't faster. I wasn't flashier. My movements were simply allowed. Valeria and I slid through his line like a key moving through air on its way to a lock that was already open. The miasma veils that had been hungry all morning lost their appetite at the threshold of my harmony and drifted aside like tired curtains. The warm room tug of red hunger walked into a closed door and forgot what it wanted. The afterblades that liked to arrive late showed up on time and realized they weren't invited to the party. "Bad day for drama," Valeria chirped. "Terrible," I said. He switched his cadence, a desperate move for a man so composed. He threw a flurry of pressure at my elbows and ankles to make my corrections expensive. Sword accord paid the bill before it even hit the table. Every small, necessary fixed cost exactly what it was supposed to, nothing extra. I stepped forward, and for the first time the ring of his control stepped back. Somewhere under that calm, a memory opened like a door I hadn't knocked on. Mount Hua, the cold air like glass. Magnus, the seventh peak, sitting at the edge of the sky, held together by sheer will and a few old jokes. The dark veins of corruption creeping from a bite he'd paid for with a dead king. "I killed him," he'd said, "at cost." Then he had drawn his own blade, not at an enemy, just at the air. And everything had paused, like the world had skipped a frame and come back embarrassed. He had touched this thing, this higher state, right at the very end.
Sois d'accord.
"Catch up," my mother's voice always said in my head. I caught up. Now I had to pass him. I let the memory close and let the work stay open. "Practical," the Archduke said, stepping in clean. There was respect in the word.
No rancor.
"Always," I said, and I gave him the respect he deserved. A finish. It was 3 notes. Not an orchestra. First, the step. I set my heel down with the house behind it. The weight of the tower, of the order in its bones, was in that single, simple motion. The world did not argue. Second, the break. A thin, almost invisible rub of gray between our 2 blades, like chalk on fingers before a difficult lift. It didn't block him. It just turned his perfect line half a hair wrong. Third, the close. In the seam between beats, in the half-inch my break had created, sword accord made a hole in the world. Valeria slid into it, an honest piece of steel going where it was now allowed to go. He stayed on his feet for one more heartbeat because he was that kind of man. His eyes were clear. He looked at me and nodded once, the way a master mechanic nods at an engine that has finally stopped making a noise no one could find. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you," I answered, because a serious enemy earns a serious end. Valeria came free like the room had decided to hand her back to me. The miasma peeled away from him like smoke that had run out of wood. Erebus drew a cold, clean ring in the air and set it down around the body, so no hungry thing could use the leaving heat as a doorway. "Spill contained," Erebus said. "No drama. Winter glass. Lucifer's twin crowns, white and black. Dimmed to something you could wear to work." He let out a breath he hadn't actually needed to be holding. "Sword accord. It looks good on you." "Feels honest," I said. "Feels expensive," Valeria said. "I'd like a new coat." "You're getting two." "She said one coat," Lucifer pointed out. "I know what I said." I told him. "She's still getting two." My harmony hung over the ring of containment like a steady hand. It touched the wound I had made and settled it, in a way that didn't try to undo anything. Respect, not an apology. Far below, Avalon's skyline flickered as the city's sensors tried to label what the sky had just done, and decided to send a memo about it later. The tower's brass ribs popped once, one by one, as they cooled, like a long hallway of light switches being turned off. "How's the gate?" Lucifer asked. "Open," I said. The word felt like a key I finally owned. Lucifer tilted his head, reading some fine print in the air that only he could see. "You're going to be intolerable for a week." "I have Stella," I said. "She'll fix that by breakfast." "That she will," he said, satisfied. I glanced down at the still form of the Archduke. A monster and a craftsman all in one person. Both had been true. I gave him a small, quiet bow he didn't need and turned back to the center of the roof. "Arthur," Erebus said, his voice careful. "The tower is adjusting. Pathways are changing. Your change, it echoes." "Good," I said. "Let it." Gray gathered itself into a polite curl at the edge of my sight and then flattened again. Harmony breathed through the brass and the air and all the way down to the stone. The crown of twilight dimmed to a simple halo I could forget until I wanted it again. I stood there, and for a moment the world didn't pull any of its small, usual tricks. That was new. That was nice. Then the air remembered it had opinions. Not miasma. Not my own power. Something silkier. An attending presence with a hand on the spine of the room. The fake sky wavered like heat on a highway. The brass ribs began to sing a high, thin note you feel in your teeth. Lucifer's eyes lifted. "Hold center." "I am." Valeria went from pleased to bright with predatory interest. "If she brings a crown," she said, "I am stealing it." "Later," I said. A thread of perfume that had never needed your consent slid through the roof and paused a hand's width above Erebus's cold ring, as if deciding whether we were worth the time. The first filament of power slid through the fake sky like silk through a ring. It stopped a hand's width above the roof, pausing as if it were deciding whether we were worth its time. The air, which had just begun to taste of clean metal and rain, was suddenly thick with the scent of perfume and knives. "Hold center," Lucifer said, his voice losing its easy tone. His twin crowns, one of pure white, one of absolute black, began to glow just enough to make the ceiling behave. He traced two small, sharp sunbrands along the main brass seam of the roof. The structure remembered its job was to stay up. "I am," I said, planting my feet. My new high radiant power, my sword accord, sat quietly in my wrists and ankles. My loosened harmony, now vast and steady, lived in the room, in the walls, the floor, and even in the quiet, cooling body of the Archduke inside Erebus's cold ring of containment. The gray flattened two plain, ordinary squares under my boots, so the floor would stop trying to have an opinion. The filament of lust's power pressed down with a polite kind of arrogance. The air in the room tried to kneel. My harmony turned that conceptual command into simple air pressure, and then into a harmless number. Numbers do not kneel. A second filament slid in behind the first. The brass ribs of the tower hummed a high, nervous note. "Do not say your name," Erebus murmured. "If she asks, let silence be your only answer." The urge to introduce myself, a deeply ingrained habit of polite society, crept up out of my hindbrain. My harmony identified the urge, set it outside on a metaphysical balcony with a glass of water and no shoes, and shut the door. The silk-like energy reached for Valeria. It was an act of pure attention, not physical weight. The kind of attention that can steal jewelry without ever touching the skin. Valeria purred in my hand. "Flattered. But they can put me down on the list with everyone else." I didn't try to swat at the filament. You don't swat at the weather. I simply shifted the air around Valeria's guard. Barely a nudge, a tiny agur trick, and the divine attention slipped off, finding nothing delicate or vain to pick at. Irritated, it clicked to the next trick. It tried to open a path through me. I could feel it testing the Empyrean order lattice in the tower's spine, looking for a way to turn Julius's old signature into a doorway. I kept my own work local and boring. Harmony calmed the room. The gray laid 2 dull pages of ordinary where the silk wanted a hinge. I used Mythweaver to write 3 tiny, invisible labels where only the moment could read them. "This is a room. We are standing. The floor keeps its promise." They weren't grand proclamations. They were drawer labels for reality. The filament pushed again. It met my boring defenses and found no convenient handle to grab. Somewhere deep in the tower's structure, the building tried to bow to a power it recognized as superior. Lucifer pressed a 3rd sunbrand into the seam, and the roof decided not to grovel. "I can hold the ceiling honest for 2 more heartbeats like this," he said, his voice flat. "Any more, and this turns into a fistfight I can't win." "2 is plenty," I said. "Spend them well." The silk thickened, ready now to force a partial descent. A heavy, cloying perfume slid down the line like a bad decision taking physical form. And then the air answered with a different kind of rude. A second thread, narrow, sharp, and hungry, came in sideways through the same seam in the sky and bit into the silk as cleanly as a needle through cloth. "Alisara," Valeria said, her voice filled with a delighted sort of dread. New in voice. She stood at the edge of my sight, as if she'd been there the whole time. Pink hair in a low braid, a simple black jacket, jeans. Her jade eyes were bright and possessive. The room got colder anyway. She didn't look at Lucifer. She looked at me, at my steady hands, at the new, open door behind my heart. "High radiance suits you," she said lightly. "Don't get proud. You owe me a better dance than this." "Book it with my assistant," I said. "I fired her in my head," she replied. She was terrible at scheduling destiny. Lucifer's expression didn't change, but his shoulders did, settling into a stance that was less about balance and more about containment. "If you two make a mess over my city," he warned, "I will become unfriendly." "I'm not here for a scene," Alisara said, and raised her right hand. A thin, dark coil of her own power unspooled from her palm and twined itself around Lysantra's filament. It sank in and stayed, not a leash so much as a vein stealing from another vein. "I'm here for a sip." "Stop," I said. "Make me," she answered sweetly. To the air, she added, "You took something of mine." The coil tightened. The divine filament bled, not blood, not light, but something that made flowers wish for a different gardener. Lysantra noticed. The pressure from above sharpened. The tower moaned like winter pipes about to burst. I stepped forward and set Valeria's edge directly under the warring threads. "Don't you dare," Alisara warned, her eyes flashing. "I'm spinning my straw into gold." "I'm not cutting you," I said. I was keeping the roof on. I kept my work where it belonged. The gray put a gutter in the ordinary air beside the threads. A neat channel for any spillover that didn't touch anyone's gift. My harmony pushed a soft, gentle drift toward that gutter, so whatever fell away from the city below. The filament from above pressed down harder. The roof of the tower bowed. Lucifer set one last sunbrand and held it with both hands, his black and white crowns burning together. "One heartbeat," he said, his voice strained. "Spend it like a miser." The silk grew a hand made of perfume and knives. It descended, palm down, toward my face, adorned with rings that had never paid taxes. "I don't recommend catching that," Lucifer said. "Not catching," I confirmed. "Sword accord is about the angles that the room allows without argument." I stepped not back, not forward, but across and lifted Valeria into the crook between the hand's two fingers, the place where pretty hands stop being pretty. The hand tried to be in several places at once. My accord made it choose one. Steel mattered. The ring finger hissed and pulled back a fraction. Alisara laughed, a sound bright and jealous. "Good, good. Get stronger." "Stop rooting for me," I said. "Never," she said, and sank her coil of power deeper into the divine thread. The filament split. Half of it forced its way down, stubborn and divine. The other half was siphoned back through Alisara's vein into her, turning her pupils into pools of blown glass. The brass ribs of the tower sang a high, keening note that hurt my teeth. Erebus's shadow lifted like a cat arching its back. "The silk," Lucifer warned, his jaw tight, "is becoming a hand." The hand above me changed shape, losing its jewelry and gaining history. It came down in the old, imperious motion that had made princes hit the floor for centuries. I stepped across again and kissed its main knuckle with Valeria, the one all the posture leans on. A small, exact, and deeply impertinent click of steel on divine will. The entire pose lost its leverage for one beat. I spent it. "Keep it open," Alisara said through her teeth, her own body trembling with the sheer volume of power she was siphoning. "I am keeping the roof on this city," I shot back. "You are very boring when you're being responsible," she muttered, and pulled. The coil flared. The siphon took Lysantra's attention, from wherever she was, focused like frost on a window pane. It stretched across an impossible distance, tasted a city, a roof, Lucifer's brands, my harmony, and decided, for now, not to spend a physical body on this argument. The silk trembled along its length and stepped back an inch. Then two. Lucifer exhaled slowly. "There's the inch. Make it a yard," I said. We did. He kept the ceiling honest with both his crowns burning together. I kept the room a room. Erebus bottled the stray sparks and swallowed the curses. The divine filament withdrew with a last, parting stroke that cut the air as if to say, "Remember me." "I won't," I said. Alisara swayed on her feet. The coil in her hand tightened into a knot and then unspooled into nothing. Her pupils shrank back to a sensible size. She blinked once, like someone who had taken one sip more than she had planned. "Greedy," Valeria said. "I learned it from watching both of you," Alisara said, and then her knees softened. I stepped forward and caught her before the stone did. "Don't drop me," she murmured, her voice far away. "Wouldn't dare." Her eyes rolled white. Her breath was steady, her pulse strong, but her mind was diving somewhere I had no ticket to. Coma, Erebus diagnosed. Alive, malicious, dormant. Lucifer eased the last sunbrand out of the seam. The crowns above his brow dimmed to a gentle bedside lamp glow. "The roof is clear." The tower groaned differently now. Less silk, more steel. The lust film peeled from the bones of the place like old wallpaper in a hot shower. "That's gone," I said. "For now," Lucifer said. "Don't celebrate." I set Alisara gently against the low wall under a brand-scorched brass rib. Unconscious, she looked almost kind. It made my teeth ache. The tower groaned again, a deep hum waking in its spine. Not lust, not Julius. It was a clock, clearing its throat. "Arthur?" Lucifer asked, his eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" I did. I looked at the roof, the city, the sleeping problem at my feet, the sword in my hand, and felt the door behind my heart ease 1 inch wider. "Yeah," I said. "I hear it." Alisara fell without moving. Her body sat against a scorched rib of brass on the tower roof, lashes still, breath steady. Inward, she dropped through velvet and knives into a place she had been building for years. A narrow stage lit by one stubborn spotlight, floor of black lacquer, red curtain drawn. The curtain breathed. Perfume rolled through it like a tide. Threads glimmered in the dark. Infinite hair-fine lines drifting down, each a promise with a hand behind it. When the first thread touched the stage, the wood shivered as if remembering an older owner. "How rude," Alisara said, and her voice made the spotlight brighter. Lysandra pressed without a body. Silk, then steel. Commands came the way thunderstorms come. Unhurried, sure, ancient. Open. The single word folded into the curtain and pushed toward Alisara's chest like a gloved hand searching for a latch. Later, Alisara thought. You knocked wrong. She lifted her right hand. The coil she'd thrown into the filament outside lived here as silver thread around her wrist. Pulsed, drinking. She felt the goddess on the other end pull back. The thread held. Lysandra pressed again. The stage tried to bow. Alisara looked at the floor like a disappointed hostess, and the floor remembered who had laid the lacquer. Not in my house. Silk thickened. Knives moved inside it. The curtain sweated light. Another word slid through. Yield. On the roof above, Lucifer's sunbrands held the ceiling. Arthur kept the room a room with that maddening grace of his harmony, gray, a few careful labels in the margins of reality. In here, Alisara had no ceiling to hold. She had only price and will. You came down too fast, she said to the air, eyes on the falling threads. You bled on the way. Now I'm going to keep what you spilled. The air answered with laughter that didn't need a mouth. It sounded like glass beads poured through expensive fingers. Alisara smiled without humor. Of course you're beautiful. You picked lust because mirrors tell you truth you can live with. The nearest thread snapped like a leash and lashed for her throat. Alisara did the impolite thing. She stepped into it. The silver coil around her wrist flashed, bit down, and drank. The thread went from silk to smoke. Lysandra noticed. Pressure hit the stage like a tide that had been waiting outside the door for centuries. The red curtain bowed. The spotlight dimmed to a coin. The smell of roses and heat tried to replace air. The word arrived a third time, this time with ruin behind it. Kneel. Alisara's knees stayed locked by sheer habit. Habit, and a small, sharp fury that had nothing to do with divinity and everything to do with a black-haired man who'd told her to wait. He told me to wait and get stronger. I did both. You will not take either. The coil around her wrist burned. Too much, too fast. Lysandra was sliding down through her own mistake, a forced descent, but even wounded divinity is still weight without scale. Alisara needed a fulcrum, a lever, something she could spend that would matter to a goddess. She reached up and plucked the crown from her head. The crimson crown had sat there for years like it had been born with her. Thin gold, too old to be fashionable, set with 6 rubies that never cooled. Kings had paid for it with cities. She had paid for it with a knife in a bishop. Hello, darling, she whispered to it. You've owed me since the river. The rubies pulsed in answer, hot as fever. The crown did not want to leave her hair. Legendary things do not love being used only once. Yes, she said softly. I know. That's why it will work. She did not throw it. She set it on the stage at her feet like a bride setting down flowers and spoke to it as if it were a person who could make choices. Listen. You were made when a king decided the world should love him back. You learned to drink anything that felt like love until all the mirrors lied the right way. I need you to remember how to take. The rubies brightened, then steadied, like a heartbeat finding tempo. There is a goddess at the door, Alisara said. She is trying to come in wrong. She is weak because she brought part of herself through weather that hates her. If you love me, take what leaks and make it mine. The crown shook once on the black floor without moving. It understood price. It had always understood price. Good. Payment? Alisara asked, as if bargaining over a meal. The nearest ruby cracked along an old fault. The crack made a clean, wet sound. "All right," she said. "All of you, then." Knives shifted in the curtain. Lysandra pressed again. The spotlight shrank to a pearl on a black ocean. Alisara lifted the crown with both hands and put it where a kneeling head would go if she obeyed. The rubies flared, one by one, in a ring. Then she took her hand off it. The crimson crown sank through the stage like it had always been a hole. Fell for a long second. Then the curtain swallowed it. Rubies blew out. Not light, want. Centuries of stored admiration. Worship, hunger, greed, need. Unspoken bargains and shouted vows all tore free at once and spun into a red storm behind the curtain. The storm did not go around Lysandra. It went through her. The silk threads rattled like river grass in a flood. For the first time, Alisara heard steel below the silk, the sound of a structure catching a crack it had not planned for. "Yes," she breathed. "Bleed for me." The coil around her wrist tightened so hard it bruised. The silver line into the curtain turned black at the edges and started to carry weight instead of perfume. The goddess on the other end pulled away, too late. The curtain rippled. A hand came through it, perfect, elegant, too many fingers. It reached for Alisara's hair like a lover would. "Don't touch me," she said, not loudly, and lifted her left hand. She didn't have Arthur's gates. She didn't have Julius's lattice. She had this, a gift that had always been called control because petty people name women's power badly. She pinched two fingers together, not at the hand, but at the idea of touching without permission. The fingers paused, half an inch from her hair, trembling. The motion wanted to finish. It had done this 1,000 times to 1,000 fools. In this one place, in this one breath, it did not. "Better," Alisara said, and closed her right fist. The coil bit. The siphon took. Lysandra came down one more step out of pride alone. Pride is food if you know how to chew it. The red storm behind the curtain ate her appetite first. The crown paid and paid and paid until each ruby was more cracked than stone. It groaned like old glass under a new foot. The hand tried again. It didn't have to. It wanted to. That is lust's honest truth. Wanting is the point. Alisara let it get close enough to see its own reflection in her eyes, and then turned her face a fraction, like a queen considering a subject and finding them uninteresting. The hand stilled in that small, humiliating space between reach and touch. "Keep kneeling," she told the idea that had told her to kneel. "We are equal now. Neither of us will." Perfume curdled into smoke. The curtain's red bled toward black and then back again as if the fabric couldn't decide who owned it. Somewhere far above, she felt Arthur's blade touch a knuckle and shift a universe half a breath. He was buying her a heartbeat at a time. "Mine," she thought, and every thread the crown touched carried that word back up the line. A voice moved through the curtain then. No words. A tone that said, "Remember me." It had carried kings to their knees and queens to their mirrors. It had made small, good people do large, stupid things. Could do none of those here. It walked to the lip of the stage and sat down instead, elegant and sulking. "Remember you?" Alisara said. "I am making a home out of you." She stepped forward and put her hand on the curtain. Felt like the inside of a mouth. "Shoo," she said, like calming a frightened animal. "This is not ending. This is changing rooms." The last ruby broke. The sound was almost tender. Gold twisted, sighed, and unmade itself into dust that smelled like old blood and weddings. The storm reached its peak and, like all storms, chose a direction to leave. Through her. Heat and cold arrived at once. Then neither. River through arteries, knives through honey, laughter and knives, so many knives. She held on and remembered how to breathe like Arthur had taught stupid men to breathe. 4 in, 6 out, count what matters. The coil burned less. The threads pulled less. The hand on the other side of the curtain lost a ring. Then it lost fingers. Then it learned not to reach. "Almost," Alisara said, and the stage held because she said it. Control was never a chain. It was a frame. Lust was never just heat. It was a story that sold itself. Together, they made something that didn't have a name yet. Fantasy, she decided. Not lies. wishes that remember to become real. She let the curtain touch her palm, not to trap her, to sign. Mine, she said softly this time. The curtain answered by stilling. The spotlight brightened until it felt like morning. The stage stopped breathing. It simply was. Threads hung quiet as hair after rain. Behind them, where the red storm had been, velvet that wasn't velvet waited, patient and obedient, like a new dress on a careful hanger. Somewhere very far away, a city stopped screaming and went back to muttering about traffic. The world above her stage continued without her help. That was Arthur's part. This was hers. She turned her hand over. Power lay on her palm, not raw, not wild. Domesticated the way tigers sometimes look domestic right before they remember the jungle. It hummed at a pitch her teeth liked. It smelled like libraries and perfume counters. It wanted to be used because that is what all power wants. Fantasy, she said to it, and the word fit. Lysandra was not dead. The divine rarely are. But the part that had come down wrong belonged to Elisara now. It would take time to integrate. Time she would pretend to spend sleeping. Time she would actually spend carving a room inside a room inside a room where no one could knock without learning manners. Try again later, she told the place where the voice had been. Bring a gift. Ask right. The stage unwound. The curtain became a coat she put on without thinking. The spotlight became a brooch she pinned at her throat. The red storm settled into memory and then into muscle. Outside, her body did not move. Lucifer's small seal glowed faintly over her heart, polite as a lid. Arthur's harmony kept the ring quiet. Valeria wanted a new coat and would get two. Elisara opened her eyes inward and found that she could write on the air if she wanted and make ink stay. She did not because she didn't need to prove it to herself. She already knew. Later, she told the power. We have time. For now, she let her eyes close in the world that had ceilings and brothers and men who insisted on being noble. Sleep looked good on a woman who had just stolen a god's favorite toy. Above her, the tower sighed as the lust film peeled clean and the bones beneath remembered the colder geometry of empire. Somewhere deep in that spine, a clock cleared its throat and began to count. Elisara smiled in her sleep. Mine, she whispered, and the new thing under her skin purred like a cat that had finally chosen a lap. The roof stopped arguing with me. It wasn't a rush of new, frantic power. It was a profound quiet. The background noise of the universe, the constant low-grade argument between my will and the world's stubborn inertia, had simply stopped. My loosened harmony, no longer a tight shield held under my ribs, settled into the walls and the floor, and the world felt honest. The gray lay under my boots like two plain pages that refused to be dramatic. Valeria was light in my hand, not because she weighed less, but because the room had finally, truly agreed with her. High radiant wasn't the feeling of sitting on top of a mountain. It was the feeling of the mountain standing up when I did. Lucifer eased a last sunbrand out of the brass seam, his twin crowns of white and black dimming to a companionable glow. Roof's clear, he said. Lust is gone, I confirmed. The oily, perfumed film that had coated every rib and bolt had peeled off like bad wallpaper in a hot shower. The air tasted of clean metal and rain instead of perfume and knives. I could feel the absence where its wrongness had been, like a healed wound that no longer ached. Erebus's voice drifted up from the quiet ring of shadow around the Archduke's body. Spill contained.
No lingering creatures. No conceptual echoes.
The asset is inert. I breathed in 4 out 6. The breath came back to me the same size I sent it out. That was new. A good new. Movement tugged at the corner of my eye. Elisara was supposed to be in a coma. She wasn't. She leaned against a bent brass rib, her pink hair in a lazy braid, a black jacket unzipped like she'd just stepped out to buy trouble from the corner store. Her jade eyes were bright, but they seemed to be looking at me from a great cosmic distance. She smiled. Not the smile she used for parties. The one she used when she'd stolen something heavy and wanted me to notice. Don't get up, I said automatically. Too late, she said softly. You made too much noise being clever. You should be unconscious. I am, she said, amused. She wiggled her fingers. Just not everywhere at once. I felt what she'd carried back with her from that sip of divinity. It was a new shape under her old, sharp edges. A confidence that didn't just bend rules but casually wrote new ones. She had tasted a principle, an anchor of a concept, and learned its weight. You ate well, Lucifer said in the tone you reserve for a dangerous animal that has wandered onto your porch. Alisara's gaze slid past him and came back to me. You bought me 2 heartbeats. I bought the rest. You almost tore the roof off a continent, I said. You almost caught a goddess by the knuckles, she replied. We're all growing up. Her smile thinned, becoming something sharper. 2 years. For what? Lucifer asked, his voice frank. For him, she said, her eyes never leaving my face. 2 years, Arthur. Don't make me wait. Become what you're trying to be. Why 2? I asked. Because I am not a patient person, she said. And because that is how long it will take me to stop being rude to the sky. Divine. Soon. The air around her bent like it does near an oven. She didn't disappear in a flash. She just turned sideways like a page in a book, and then wasn't there at all. Her physical body, still leaning against the rib, slumped into a true, deep coma. I let out a long breath. She's going to make it. Lucifer nodded once. She is. 2 years, I said to the quiet room. Plenty of time, he said. For you. Erebus gave his final report. The tether is cut. The film is gone. The remaining structure is honest. It will not be friendly, but it will obey its own rules. 6 months would be a sensible deadline. Then it's ours to finish, I said. Lucifer tapped the seam he'd branded. We can go. I looked over the roof, the quiet ring of containment, the hole in the fake sky where a goddess had tried to learn the word no. Then I folded the gray across the room like a clean sheet, opened it in a neat line, and we stepped through. The sensory whiplash was immediate. We left the cold, sterile, metallic silence of the tower and arrived in the warm, quiet comfort of the penthouse. The air here wasn't just air. It smelled of roses, flowers, of old books, of the scones Reka had baked that morning. It smelled of life. The elevator chimed softly down the hall. Footsteps. Then a comet with messy black hair launched itself down the corridor. Stella hit me at a speed that would have knocked over a less prepared demigod. I caught her and lifted her, and the cold, vast, cosmic weight of the battle I had just fought was instantly replaced by the simple, absolute, grounding weight of my daughter. Daddy! Hey, little star! I said, burying my face in her hair. I forgot all the clever, important things I had said that day because her arms were wrapped around my neck like the world was finally the right size again. She smelled of soap and drawing pencils and the very edge of sleep. This small, simple weight in my arms was a heavier anchor than any 9-circle spell. You're late, she said into my collar. I know. I counted, she said, sitting back to glare at me with serious eyes. Grandma said I should practice patience. I did, for 10 whole minutes. That's a very long time, I said solemnly. It was forever, she confirmed. Are you safe now? I am. I glanced at the simple bracelet of matte beads on my wrist. It was still there. I had looked at it 100 times in the tower, a quiet, solid reminder of what was real. Is the sky okay? She asked. It is. She squinted. No lying. No lying, I said, and let my harmony settle over the room so the answer felt as true as it was. She nodded, satisfied, and kissed my cheek with the focused force that only 12-year-olds can apply to affection. Good. Reka was the first around the corner, her expression composed, her violet eyes worried in the way only I know how to read. She scanned me with a gaze that measured pulse, posture, and the tiny scuffs on a coat and added them all up. Master, she said softly. Her hand went to my wrist, not just to check my pulse, but to feel for the telltale resonance of conceptual damage. Her fingers, cool and professional, traced the lines of my skin, searching for any lingering echo of the vows or the miasma. She found none. She exhaled slowly through her nose, a sound of profound relief, and leaned her forehead against my shoulder for exactly 1 second. Welcome home. Rose came next, her brown eyes tracking my face the way a gardener checks a prized tree after a hard storm. She reached up and set her palm flat against my chest. It wasn't a spell. It was a habit, a way of checking the rhythm of the heart inside. Her own magical senses were sharp, and she felt the change. It's quiet, she murmured, her eyes wide. Everything about you is quieter. The accord, I felt it. It agreed, I said simply. She smiled then, a slow, radiant smile of pure relief. Hi, she said. Rachel rounded the hall like a warm breeze with knives tucked into it. She took one look at me, one at Lucifer, one at the hole in my sleeve I had somehow missed, and lifted an eyebrow. Property damage report says, undefined atmospheric anomaly, she announced. I wrote, Arthur tripped over a goddess. That's slander, I said. I never trip. You staggered artfully, she corrected, and hugged me hard enough to make my ribs remember they had a job. As she pulled back, she went into healer mode, her eyes narrowing at the miasma burn on my forearm. We'll be dealing with this later. Don't think you're getting out of a full diagnostic. Cecilia followed, a crimson-eyed empress in casual clothes. Her gaze was sharp. Status. Threat neutralized. Hostile influence removed, I reported. Secondary asset compromised and contained. Good, she said, the leader satisfied. Then her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Arthur, it is good to have you back. She took my face in both hands, kissed my forehead, and commanded, and you will sleep. Serafina arrived last, a line of cool, clean winter. She didn't speak. She simply touched my cheek with the back of her fingers. A flicker of her clean, perfect frost magic flowed from her touch, not to freeze, but to soothe the burn on my cheek from a deflected heat bead. It was a quiet, practical, caring act that said more than any words could. Welcome back, she said. Luna leaned in the doorway behind them, her golden eyes bright. She didn't need to ask. The gate is open, she sent to my mind, her voice a warm, golden light. The path is clear. You did not falter. I am proud. I nodded. She nodded back. Stella wriggled impatiently in my arms. Hug time is over. Ice cream time is now. See, I told Lucifer. She keeps me from being intolerable. She saves the Empire daily, he said, deadpan. Daddy, did you fight a god? She whispered in my ear. I thought of a hand with too many rings and not enough manners. Soon, I thought. But not today. Not today, I said. Okay, she said, believing me. Tomorrow we do projects. We're building a model of the solar system with proper orbital mechanics. Deal. We moved into the living room. Reka brought out bowls and began a solemn negotiation with Stella about the merits of mint chocolate chip versus Rocky Road. Rose started a kettle with a flick of her finger and a look. Serafina opened the window 2 inches and let the clean night air in. Cecilia checked 3 last feeds from the palace, then put her slate face down with visible, final effort. Lucifer sat on the arm of a chair, watching our chaotic, loving family dynamic with an almost anthropological curiosity. Thank you, I told him. Always, he said. Just try not to schedule the next apocalypse for breakfast. I sat. The couch held me like it had been waiting all night to do that one job well. Stella climbed into my lap and made herself the exact shape of an anchor. Tell us the short version, Cecilia said. Short, Reka echoed, warning me off a lecture. Very short, Rachel threatened cheerfully. I looked at the faces of my family, at my daughter tucked safely in my arms, and gave them the only version that mattered. I fought the Archduke, I said. He was good. I got better. The tower tried to invite a bad guest over. We said no. Alisara stole their coat on the way out. Rose just shook her head, a smile of pure, unadulterated relief on her face. Rachel snorted with laughter. It has verbs, I defended. Stella patted my chest. Daddy? I'm glad you're home. Me too, I said, and I meant it with the kind of clarity you only get after holding a sword at the edge of something that isn't impressed by swords. We ate too much ice cream. We argued about flavors like it mattered. At some point, Stella fell asleep mid-lecture about why portable mana visualizers should be standard in primary schools. Her head was heavy and perfect against my shoulder. The 5 women watched me over mugs of tea, their relief a quiet, tangible thing in the room. 2 years, 6 months. I let the thoughts sit there without poking them. The paradox of my life was that I had to reach for a power that could shake the heavens, all to protect these small, simple human moments. The quiet of a child sleeping, the warmth of a blanket being draped over my legs, the silent, shared understanding with the people who held my world together. I kissed the top of Stella's head. The crown of twilight hovered a little lower, as if it wanted to listen to her breathing. "Welcome home," Rose said again, her voice soft. "Mandatory rest," Cecilia decreed. "Okay," I said, and for once I didn't mean I'll try. I meant yes. Outside, Avalon glittered. Inside, the room stayed a room. The floor kept its promise. And the only thread that mattered was a small child's arm around my neck. After the storm, you count what stayed. Plenty did.